My daughter-in-law dragged me into court, pointing her manicured finger at me and calling me a batshit crazy old man in front of a packed room. She claimed I had lost my mind. She told the judge I was a danger to myself and could not be trusted with my own estate. Her high-priced lawyer stood beside her, smiling with absolute confidence, certain they were about to strip away everything I had built over 40 years. That was until the judge banged his gavel, looked straight at her, and asked a single question. "Are you absolutely sure you want to continue with these accusations under oath?" The courtroom fell dead silent. Moments later, the judge ruled in my favor, and I watched the color completely drain from her pale face. But before I tell you how a 72-year-old retired contractor dismantled their entire lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respecting your elders is a rule, not an option. The glossy brochure hit my solid oak dining table with a sharp, disrespectful slap. I looked down at the bold, elegant lettering that read, "Sunset Meadows Premium Assisted Living." Chloe folded her arms across her chest. She was wearing a silk blouse that cost more than my first truck. "You left the gas stove on again this morning, Desmond," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sugary concern she always used when she was about to say something venomous. "And frankly, the house is starting to get that old man smell. We cannot have that. It is simply not sanitary." I looked at her calmly. A white woman in her early 30s who had married my son 5 years ago and immediately started treating my home like her personal waiting room for an inheritance. I had not left the stove on. I have been a structural engineer and a general contractor for 40 years. I built half the commercial properties in this part of Washington, D.C. from the dirt up. I checked the valves and locks in my house out of pure ingrained habit, but I did not argue. Arguing is exactly what she wanted. I shifted my gaze to my son Terrence. He was 38 years old, an African-American man who proudly called himself a tech CEO, currently hiding behind the glowing screen of his expensive smartphone. He did not even look up to meet the eyes of the man who raised him single-handedly after his mother passed away. "She makes a valid point, Dad," Terrence mumbled relentlessly, scrolling through his emails. "You are getting up there. Your memory is slipping. You need 24-hour care. We are just trying to be responsible." Responsible. That was a rich word coming from a man whose startup was bleeding money faster than a punctured artery. "I appreciate your concern, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice low and raspy. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch to sell the act. I let my hands, thick and calloused from decades of hard labor, tremble slightly as I reached across the table for my crystal water glass. I tipped the glass just enough. It slipped from my fingers, shattering against the edge of the heavy table. Ice water splashed violently across the mahogany wood, soaking right through the glossy assisted living brochure and splashing directly onto Chloe's designer trousers. She jumped back with a dramatic shriek, swatting at her legs as if I had thrown boiling acid on her. "Look at what you did. Are you completely blind?" "I am so sorry," I stammered, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I blinked rapidly, acting deeply confused and embarrassed. My hands, they just do not grip like they used to. "Let me clean that up for you." "Do not touch it," Chloe snapped, grabbing a handful of napkins and aggressively dabbing at her pants. She glared at Terrence with pure fury. "This is exactly what I am talking about. He is a massive liability in this house. He is going to burn the place down or flood it. I cannot deal with this tonight. I am going upstairs." She stormed out of the dining room, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floors I had installed with my own 2 hands 20 years ago. Terrence finally put his phone down, letting out a heavy, exaggerated sigh that told me exactly how burdensome he found my existence. "Look at the mess you made, Dad," he said, shaking his head with a look of profound disappointment. "Just leave it. The cleaning lady comes tomorrow. I am going to check on my wife." He walked away without another word. He did not ask if I had cut myself on the broken glass. He did not offer a towel or a helping hand. He just walked away. I waited in the dining room until I heard the heavy thud of their bedroom door closing on the second floor. The moment the latch clicked, the pathetic trembling in my hands vanished completely. My posture straightened up. The confused, fragile old man evaporated into the quiet evening air, leaving only Desmond Wright. I quietly crouched down to pick up the large shards of glass. As I wiped the baseboard near my custom-built television stand, my keen eyes caught something that did not belong in my living room. It was a tiny reflection of light, a faint, almost invisible blue blink pulsing in the shadows. I leaned in closer, Tucked perfectly into the dark crevice beneath the lip of the bottom shelf, held in place by a small square of double-sided tape, was a micro camera. It was no bigger than a shirt button. It was positioned perfectly to record the dining room table and the hallway leading into the kitchen. My heart did not race. It turned to absolute ice. They were not just insulting me to my face at the dinner table. They were surveilling me in my own home. They were secretly recording my daily routine, desperately waiting for me to trip, to fall, to forget a pot on the stove, or to look reasonably confused. They needed video evidence to build a case against my sanity. A younger, more impulsive man would have smashed the little plastic device with a hammer. He would have marched upstairs, kicked the door open, and thrown them both out onto the street into the cold night without a second thought. But you do not survive 4 decades in the cutthroat construction business by throwing emotional tantrums. You survive by gathering leverage and striking only when your opponent is completely exposed. I carefully popped the device loose from the wood. I examined the side and found exactly what I expected to see: a microscopic memory card slot. I used the tip of my pocket knife to gently eject the tiny card. I walked quietly into my home office, unlocked my bottom desk drawer, and pulled out an identical blank memory card I kept as a spare for my dashboard camera. I slipped the blank card into their hidden spy camera and placed the device back under the television stand exactly how I had found it. Then I sat down at my heavy desk, booted up my laptop, and inserted their memory card into my reader. They must have assumed that because I was 72, I was technologically illiterate. But I oversaw the installation of complex smart home security networks for millionaires before I retired. I know my way around digital files. I opened the storage drive. There were dozens of audio and video clips dating back 3 entire weeks. 3 weeks of my own son and his wife recording me like a lab rat in a maze. I clicked on a video file time-stamped from the previous night at 11 o'clock. The screen showed the dark, empty living room, but the audio was crystal clear. It was Chloe and Terrence sitting on the sofa just out of the camera frame pouring wine. What I heard next made the blood roar in my ears. "The stupid old fool is too healthy," Chloe was saying, her voice slightly slurred with expensive alcohol. "He exercises every morning. He reads complex books. We cannot just tell people he is getting old. We need medical proof that he has advanced dementia. We need a doctor to sign off on a conservatorship right now, Terrence." I know, Terrence replied, sounding stressed. "But he is incredibly stubborn. He will never go to a neurologist voluntarily. He thinks he is invincible." "Then we create the symptoms ourselves," Chloe hissed coldly. "We start moving his things around the house. We hide his car keys. We gaslight him every single day until he actually thinks he is losing his mind. And if that does not work, I already have a doctor in my pocket who will write whatever medical report we need for the right price. We need to seize control and sell this historic property before your startup investors realize you are completely bankrupt." I sat in the dark of my office, staring blankly at the glowing screen of my laptop. The son I had fed, clothed, and educated with my own sweat and blood was actively plotting to legally erase my existence, just to cover his own massive financial failures. They wanted to play a dangerous game of deception in my house. They wanted to see who could be the most ruthless. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had severely underestimated the quiet, patient wrath of a man who built towering skyscrapers from the ground up and knew exactly where to strike to make a foundation crumble to dust. I sat back in my heavy leather desk chair and let the cold glow of the laptop screen wash over my face. The silence of my home felt completely different now. Just an hour ago, this was my sanctuary. Now it felt like a crime scene. I closed the first video file, my calloused fingers resting heavily on the trackpad. I took a deep, steadying breath. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. This was not just a house they were plotting to steal. This was a 4,000-square-foot historic brownstone in the heart of Washington, D.C. When I bought this property back in the 1980s, it was a crumbling, abandoned shell in a red-lined neighborhood. The bank loan officers laughed in my face. The white construction foreman I worked for told me I was throwing my hard-earned money into a grave. But I am a black man who built his life from nothing. I spent 40 years laying every brick, running every copper wire, and reinforcing every wooden joist with my own hands. I bled for this house. Now the neighborhood is a heavily gentrified gold mine. Real estate developers constantly knock on my solid oak front door, offering millions of dollars in cash. And my own flesh and blood, the boy I fed and clothed, wanted to snatch it right out from under me to save his own pathetic skin. I clicked on the next audio file on the memory card. It was time-stamped 2 days ago, right around midnight. The audio began with the sharp sound of a glass shattering against the wall, followed by heavy, panicked breathing. It was Terrence. His voice was not the smooth, arrogant tone of a wealthy tech CEO. It was high-pitched and frantic, the sound of a drowning man desperately gasping for air. He was hyperventilating, pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor. I lied to them. Chloe. Terrence was sobbing, his voice cracking under the weight of his own failure. I falsified the user metrics. The investors found out. They are pulling out completely. The startup is a massive failure. They are calling in the loans by the end of the month. $1.5 million. That number echoed through my laptop speakers and settled into the dark corners of my office. $1.5 million in debt. Terrence was weeping like a child, terrified that he was going to face federal wire fraud charges and go to prison if he could not produce the capital. He begged his wife for comfort. He asked her what they were going to do. But Chloe did not offer comfort. There was no wifely support, just pure, unadulterated venom. "I did not marry a failure, Terrence," she screamed, her voice so sharp it could cut glass. "I did not marry you to live like a pauper. I refuse to be dragged back into poverty. I am not giving up my designer clothes, my luxury cars, or my country club memberships because you were too stupid to run a simple software company." Terrence continued to cry, pleading with her not to leave him. He was completely broken, completely subservient to her rage. He asked her how they could possibly generate $1.5 million in 30 days. Her answer was so cold it made the hair on my arms stand up. "Look around you, you spineless coward," Chloe hissed. "We are sitting inside a gold mine. This house is worth at least $2.5 million on the current market. All we have to do is get rid of the gatekeeper." Terrence hesitated. He asked her what she meant. He reminded her that the house belonged to me, that my name was the only one on the deed. Chloe did not stutter. She told him exactly what to do. "Throw that old man into a mental ward," she commanded. "We need to file for an emergency conservatorship immediately. We strip him of his legal rights, sell the historic house, pay off your massive debt, and keep the rest of the cash for ourselves to start over." "But he is fine," Terrence weakly protested. "My dad is sharp. The judge will see right through it." "He is a batshit crazy old man," Chloe fired back ruthlessly. "He is 72 years old. Nobody listens to old black men anyway. If we drug him up enough, he will not even know what day of the week it is. He is not in his right mind. No court in this city will question a successful son making tough medical decisions for his poor, aging father. We tell the judge he is a danger to himself. We tell them he leaves the stove on. We say he gets violent. Do you want to go to federal prison, Terrence, or do you want to be a man and take what is rightfully ours?" The audio file ended with the sound of Terrence quietly agreeing. He agreed to destroy my life. He agreed to lock me in a psychiatric facility until the day I died, just to cover up his own financial crimes. I sat back in my heavy chair and stared into the darkness of the room. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are for the weak. Tears are for victims who do not know how to fight back. I was not a victim. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was about to become the architect of their absolute destruction. I realized in that moment where I had gone wrong. I had spoiled Terrence. After his mother died, I wanted him to have everything I never had. I sent him to expensive private schools. I bought him his first luxury car. I paid for his college tuition in full. He never had to mix wet cement in the freezing rain. He never had to carry heavy lumber up 3 flights of stairs. I made his life too easy, and in return he became a weak, entitled man who thought he could simply harvest my bones to feed his own greed. The bond of father and son died right then and there in the cold silence of my office. This was no longer a family matter. This was a war zone. They thought because I walked a little slower, my brain had turned to mush. They thought I was an easy target. But a man who has spent his entire life studying blueprints knows exactly how to spot a weak foundation. Terrence and Chloe had built their arrogant lifestyle on quicksand, and I was going to pull the ground right out from under their expensive shoes. I reached for the heavy leather-bound notepad on my desk. I needed to start drafting a strategy. I needed to contact my financial advisors. I needed to move my liquid assets immediately. But before my pen could even touch the thick paper, my smartphone buzzed violently against the wooden desk. The bright screen illuminated the dark room, casting a harsh white glow over my hands. It was an automated high-priority text message from my primary banking institution. I picked up the phone and read the notification. My jaw clenched so tightly that my teeth ached. The message read, "Fraud alert. A withdrawal of $8,500 has just been initiated from your private retirement savings account. Please contact customer service immediately if you did not authorize this transaction." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to pure fire. They were not just planning to steal my home in the near future. Chloe had not waited for the conservatorship. She had somehow bypassed my security protocols. She had gained access to my most private accounts. The robbery had already begun. The morning sun crept through the custom plantation shutters I had installed back in 2006, casting long, sharp shadows across the living room floor. I had not slept a single wink. Instead, I spent the early hours of the morning making a few very quiet, very strategic phone calls. I contacted my private wealth manager to immediately freeze the compromised retirement account and reroute all my remaining liquid assets into a secure, heavily encrypted trust that my son and his greedy wife did not even know existed. They managed to steal $8,500. It was a painful sting, but in the grand scheme of the war we were now fighting, it was just the cost of admission. I let them have that small victory because it made them arrogant, and arrogant people always make fatal mistakes. Right around 10 o'clock, I heard the heavy front door creak open. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of Chloe's expensive heels echoed through the foyer. But she was not alone. There was a heavier, unfamiliar set of footsteps walking beside her. I remained seated in my favorite leather armchair, the newspaper resting in my lap, acting as though I was completely absorbed in the sports section. Chloe marched into the living room with a bright plastic smile plastered across her pale face. "Desmond," she announced in that high-pitched, overly cheerful voice people use when speaking to toddlers or stray dogs, "I brought someone to see you." Stepping out from behind her was a tall, overly groomed white man in a tailored navy blue suit. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore a gold watch that caught the morning light. He looked less like a medical professional and more like a high-stakes corporate lawyer. "Desmond, this is Dr. Harrison." Chloe continued, gesturing to the man. "We know you have not been to the clinic in a while, and Terrence and I are just so worried about your health. We arranged for a private concierge wellness check, right here in the comfort of your own home. Is not that wonderful?" I looked at the man. Dr. Harrison offered a tight, patronizing smile that did not quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Desmond," he said, stepping forward and extending a manicured hand. He spoke slowly, over enunciating every single syllable as if he assumed my brain was too slow to process normal human speech. "Chloe tells me you have been having some forgetful days recently. We are just here to have a little chat. Nothing to worry about." My blood boiled beneath the surface, but my face remained an absolute blank slate. A master builder knows that you never show the inspector the cracks in your foundation until you are ready to demolish the whole house. I knew exactly what this was. This was not a wellness check. This was an interrogation. This was the first brick in the wall they were building to lock me away in a psychiatric ward. I let my hand tremble just a fraction as I reached out to shake his. "Oh, a doctor," I mumbled, letting my voice sound weak and gravelly. I did not know I had an appointment. Terrence did not tell me. Dr. Harrison chuckled softly, glancing at Chloe with a knowing look. "Well, at our age, things tend to slip the mind, do they not? Mind if I sit down?" Without waiting for my permission, he made himself comfortable on my vintage velvet sofa, pulling a thick notepad from his briefcase. Chloe stood nervously by the fireplace, her eyes darting back and forth between us. Now Desmond, Dr. Harrison began clicking his expensive silver pen. "I am going to ask you a few very simple questions, just a routine cognitive assessment. Can you tell me what the current year is?" I stared at him blankly. I let my jaw go slightly slack. I looked around the room as if searching for the answer hidden in the wallpaper. 1998, I whispered hesitantly. Chloe let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. She crossed her arms, looking at the doctor with an expression that screamed, "I told you so." "I see," Dr. Harrison said, scribbling a note on his pad. "And can you tell me who the current president of the United States is?" I blinked rapidly, rubbing my temples with shaking hands. "That fellow from Arkansas," I mumbled. Bill Clinton. Good man, plays the saxophone." Dr. Harrison scribbled furiously. "Fascinating. Desmond, I want you to count backwards from 100 by sevens." I furrowed my brow, acting deeply frustrated. I started stammering out random numbers, mixing up 50s and 30s, intentionally sounding completely lost and overwhelmed. I played the part of the broken, senile old black man flawlessly. I gave them exactly the pathetic stereotype they were banking on. I even made sure to look up at the doctor and ask, What did you say your name was again? Dr. Henderson. It is Harrison Desmond, he corrected, his voice dripping with condescension. Dr. Harrison. Right, Dr. Harris, I replied, nodding vacantly. But while my face played the part of a confused elder, my hands were quietly doing the work of a seasoned tactician. I purposefully fumbled with my reading glasses, letting them drop to the floor. Oh, my clumsy hands, I muttered. As I leaned forward to pick them up from the rug, I reached beneath the heavy wooden lip of my coffee table. Just 20 minutes before they arrived, I had firmly taped my smartphone under that exact spot with the high-definition voice recording application already running. I tapped the screen once to ensure the recording was active, scooped up my glasses, and sat back up, offering a frail, apologetic smile. Well, doctor, I said slowly, rising from my armchair, my knees popping loudly for dramatic effect. All these numbers have given me quite a headache, and my bladder is not what it used to be. If you will excuse me, I need to use the restroom. Take your time, Dr. Harris. Take all the time you need, Desmond. Dr. Harrison replied, not even bothering to look up from his notepad. I turned and shuffled slowly down the hallway, dragging my left foot, slightly leaning heavily against the wall as if I could barely support my own weight. I opened the bathroom door, stepped inside, and closed it with a loud click, but I did not lock it. I did not turn on the sink. I stood perfectly still in the dark, my back pressed flat against the cool plaster of the wall. Through the thin crack in the door, the acoustics of my long hallway carried their voices straight to my ears. The moment they thought I was out of earshot, the sickening sweet tone evaporated from Chloe's voice. Well, she demanded in a harsh, urgent whisper. Is this enough? Dr. Harrison let out a low whistle. It is worse than you described on the phone, Chloe. The man is completely detached from reality. He does not know what decade he is living in. I can easily write this up as severe late-stage cognitive decline. He is absolutely unfit to manage his own estate or his finances. I heard the distinct heavy rustle of thick paper. It was a sound I knew well from my days paying cash to rough contractors on construction sites. It was the sound of a heavy envelope changing hands. I do not want just a standard evaluation, Chloe hissed, her voice filled with absolute malice. Make the medical record look as bad as possible. I need the emergency conservatorship by next week. The startup creditors are breathing down Terrence's neck. We are out of time. If we do not get control of this house and the bank accounts in 7 days, we are ruined. I heard Dr. Harrison tap his pen against the coffee table. You understand that fast-tracking a medical psychiatric hold carries significant risks, Chloe. The legal board scrutinizes these emergency orders. That is why I am paying you double your usual under-the-table fee, she fired back aggressively. Just sign the damn papers, Harrison. Declare him a danger to himself. Say he tried to attack you if you have to. Just get it done. I will have the certified documents filed with the court clerk by Monday morning. Dr. Harrison replied smoothly, the sound of the thick envelope slipping into his leather briefcase sealing the deal. You and your husband will have full legal custody over his life and his assets before the month is over. Standing in the darkness of the bathroom, I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. My daughter-in-law was not just stealing my money. She was actively bribing a corrupt medical professional to legally kidnap me. She was committing severe federal crimes, wire fraud, bribery, and elder abuse, all in the center of my own living room. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they had successfully laid the bricks for my prison. But they did not realize I had just recorded every single word of their dirty transaction. They had handed me the exact sledgehammer I needed to demolish their entire lives. I flushed the toilet, washed my hands, and shuffled back into the living room wearing the same vacant, pathetic smile. I was no longer just a father dealing with a greedy son. I was a man preparing for war, and I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, they would have absolutely nothing left. My daughter-in-law dragged me into court, pointing her manicured finger at me and calling me a batshit crazy old man in front of a packed room. She claimed I had lost my mind. She told the judge I was a danger to myself and could not be trusted with my own estate. Her high-priced lawyer stood beside her, smiling with absolute confidence, certain they were about to strip away everything I had built over 40 years. That was until the judge banged his gavel, looked straight at her, and asked a single question. Are you absolutely sure you want to continue with these accusations under oath? The courtroom fell dead silent. Moments later, the judge ruled in my favor, and I watched the color completely drain from her pale face. But before I tell you how a 72-year-old retired contractor dismantled their entire lives, Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respecting your elders is a rule, not an option. The heavy rain battered against the historic windows of my brownstone later that afternoon. I was sitting in my kitchen nursing a cup of black coffee, still processing the audio I had recorded of Dr. Harrison selling his medical license to my daughter-in-law for a thick envelope of cash. I was calculating my next move when a frantic, erratic knocking rattled my back door. Not the front door, the heavy oak door in the back alley, the one only family knew how to access. I stood up, my joints stiff but my mind razor sharp. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Standing there in the pouring rain, soaking wet and shivering uncontrollably, was my 18-year-old granddaughter Maya. She was Terrence's daughter from his first marriage. Her mother passed away when she was just a little girl, and I had practically raised her. We spent countless summer afternoons on this very porch eating peach cobbler and building birdhouses out of scrap wood from my job sites. She was the only pure thing left in my bloodline. "Grandpa," she sobbed, her voice cracking as she practically fell into my arms. I caught her instantly. The frail, shaking old man routine vanished entirely. I wrapped my large, calloused hands around her shoulders and pulled her out of the cold. I locked the door behind her, grabbed a thick towel from the pantry, and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "Maya, sweet girl, what is going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady and deep, the voice of the patriarch she had always known. "Why are you crying out in the rain?" She looked up at me, her large brown eyes red and swollen. She searched my face, looking for the madness she had been promised was there. "Chloe told me I was not allowed to come here anymore," Maya choked out, wiping her wet cheeks. "She packed my bags this morning and told me I am moving into the campus dorms early. She said you are not safe to be around anymore." I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Not safe. What exactly did she tell you, Maya? Maya took a trembling breath and sat down at the kitchen island. "She told me your mind is completely gone. She sat me down last night and said you have been having severe paranoid delusions. She looked me dead in the eye and swore to God that yesterday you pulled a kitchen knife on my dad. She said you cornered him by the refrigerator, screaming that he was a stranger trying to rob you. She told me you are violent, unpredictable, and that she is filing emergency paperwork to have you locked in a psychiatric facility before you end up killing somebody." The sheer magnitude of the lie hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was not enough for Chloe to steal my home and strip me of my freedom. She was actively trying to destroy the only genuine relationship I had left in this world. She was trying to make my own granddaughter terrified of me. She painted me as a violent, deranged monster. In America, painting a large 72-year-old black man as violent and unpredictable is a death sentence. It is the kind of lie that gets the police called. It is the kind of lie that gets people killed. I pulled up a chair and sat directly across from her. I looked deep into her eyes. "Maya, do you believe her? Do you think I am losing my mind? Do you think I would ever under any circumstances raise a weapon against my own son?" Maya fiercely shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her face. "No, absolutely not. I know you, Grandpa. You are the smartest, most patient man I have ever known. I know Chloe is a liar. I see how she looks at you. I hear how she talks to my dad when they think my bedroom door is closed. I know they are broke. I know Dad's company is failing. I know she is desperate for money." A wave of immense pride washed over me. Terrence had turned out weak, but Maya had inherited my spine. She had inherited my eyes. I pretended to agree with her. Maya continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. I packed my bags like a good, obedient daughter. But when Chloe went to the master bathroom to get ready for her luxury spa appointment, I slipped into her home office. I knew she was hiding something. She has been locking that door for weeks. She always leaves her keys in her designer purse, so I took them. Maya reached deep into the front pocket of her soaked denim jacket. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a sleek silver USB flash drive. She placed it gently on the marble counter between us. "It was plugged into the back of her desktop computer," Maya whispered. There was a sticky note on the monitor that said "Urgent Legal Processing." I did not have time to look at the files. I just yanked it out and ran out the back door. I came straight here. "Grandpa, I think they are trying to steal the house." I stared at the small silver drive. It looked so harmless, yet I knew it contained the blueprints to my absolute destruction. I looked at the brave, soaking wet 18-year-old girl sitting in my kitchen. She had risked everything to warn me. If Chloe found out she had stolen this, she would make Maya's life a living hell. You did a very brave thing today, Maya, I said, placing my heavy hand over hers. You showed true loyalty. And I promise you I will never let that woman or your father lay a single hand on your future. But right now I need you to be strong. I need to see exactly what kind of poison they are brewing. I stood up and led her into my home office. The room was dark, lit only by the green glow of my desk lamp. I booted up my encrypted laptop. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm, the rhythm of a soldier preparing for a long battle. I took the silver USB drive from Maya and inserted it into the port. A folder popped up on the screen. It was labeled DW Estate Transfer. I clicked on the folder. Inside were dozens of scanned PDF documents banking routing numbers and property appraisals. But there was one file that caught my immediate attention. It was titled Emergency Power of Attorney Final. I double-clicked the file. A high-resolution scanned document filled my screen. It was a legally binding power of attorney form. The text explicitly granted Terrence and Chloe complete unchecked authority over my medical decisions, my bank accounts, my retirement funds, and my real estate properties. It stated that due to my severe, irreversible cognitive decline, I was surrendering all my earthly rights to my son. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page. There, sitting on the signature line, was my name, Desmond Wright. Maya gasped softly behind me. "Grandpa," she whispered, "did you sign that?" I stared at the ink on the screen. It was a very good forgery. The loops were tight. The slant was remarkably accurate. To a tired bank teller or an overworked county clerk, it would look perfectly legitimate. But I spent 40 years drafting architectural blueprints. I spent 4 decades signing off on million-dollar construction permits. I know the weight of my own pen. I know the microscopic hesitations in my own signature. This was not my signature. But what truly broke my heart, what completely shattered the last remaining fragment of love I held for the boy I raised, was recognizing exactly whose hand had written it. Chloe was too arrogant and impatient to practice my handwriting. The pressure applied to the letters, the sharp angle of the capital letter D, the slight drag at the end of the letter T. I had seen that exact handwriting on countless failing report cards, on rushed birthday cards, on loan applications I had co-signed. It was Terrence, my own flesh and blood, the son I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had protected from the harshness of the world. He did not just stand by while his vicious wife plotted against me. He was not just a weak, passive participant. He had picked up the pen. He had actively committed federal wire fraud. He had forged my signature to legally execute me while I was still breathing. I sat back in my chair. The silence in the room was absolute. Maya was weeping softly, realizing exactly what her father had done. "Grandpa, what are we going to do?" she asked, her voice filled with terror. I reached over and safely ejected the USB drive. I slipped it securely into my shirt pocket. I looked at the dark window, watching the rain wash over the city I had helped build. "We are going to let them think they are winning," I said, my voice turning to cold, hard steel. "We are going to let them walk into a courtroom with these forged papers. We are going to let them lie to a judge under oath, because a poorly built house will always collapse under its own weight, Maya. And I am about to knock out their only supporting pillar." I made sure Maya was safely out of the house. I gave her some cash, told her to stay with her best friend across town, and ordered her to keep her phone turned off. I could not risk Chloe or Terrence getting suspicious and trying to manipulate the girl anymore. Once the heavy oak door closed behind her, the house fell into a thick, suffocating silence. I walked back to my study and sat in the dark. I did not call the police. Calling the police right now would be a massive mistake. If squad cars rolled up to my house, Terrence and Chloe would just play the victims. They would cry, they would lie, and they would claim that their poor, confused father was having a paranoid episode. They would use the police visit as further proof that I was losing my mind. No, I did not need the police. I needed a predator. I needed someone who specialized in absolute, undeniable destruction. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had memorized over 30 years ago. Evelyn Vance is a 68-year-old African-American powerhouse. She is a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in Atlanta. Back in the 1990s, when the city was actively trying to box black contractors out of lucrative commercial development deals, Evelyn was the shark I hired to tear their discriminatory contracts to shreds. She does not practice family law. She practices corporate warfare. But what my son and his wife were planning was no longer a family matter. This was a hostile takeover, and I needed my best soldier. The phone rang twice before her sharp, commanding voice came through the speaker. "Desmond Wright," she said, sounding pleasantly surprised. "It has been a long time. To what do I owe the pleasure of this call?" "I need a demolition job, Evelyn," I said, my voice completely stripped of any warmth. "Someone poured a bad foundation on my property and I need to bring the whole structure down on their heads." Evelyn's tone instantly shifted from friendly to strictly professional. She knew me too well. She knew I never spoke like that unless the situation was dire. "Tell me exactly what we are looking at, Desmond." I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything. I told her about Chloe's sudden interest in my health. I told her about the hidden camera I found under the television. I told her about the audio recordings of my son planning to lock me in a psychiatric facility to pay off his massive startup debts. And finally, I told her about the silver USB drive Maya had stolen, the one containing a forged power of attorney, with my signature perfectly faked by my own son. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of Evelyn's manicured fingernails tapping against her mahogany desk. "Send me those files right now," she ordered. "Every single one of them. Use the encrypted email server I set up for you years ago." I opened my laptop, attached the scanned PDF of the forged power of attorney, and sent it to her private server. I sat in the dark, listening to the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, waiting for her verdict. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Desmond," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "The situation is actually much worse for them than you think. This is not just a fake piece of paper. This is a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Look at the metadata on the file you just sent me," she explained. "Terrence did not just print this out and keep it in a drawer. The digital footprint shows that he scanned this forged document and emailed it to a commercial real estate broker, likely to prove he has the legal authority to list your historic brownstone on the market." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. He is trying to secure a buyer before I am even out of the house. "Exactly," Evelyn continued. "But here is the beautiful part, Desmond. By transmitting a forged legal document bearing a fake signature across a digital network to secure a financial transaction, your son just committed federal wire fraud. That is not a local misdemeanor. That is a felony investigated by the FBI. It carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison." The weight of her words settled heavily on my shoulders. My only son. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. The boy I had protected from the world. He had crossed a line from which he could never, ever return. A small, weak part of me wanted to march upstairs, kick his bedroom door open, throw the forged document in his face, and demand that he leave my house immediately. I wanted to give him a chance to run away before he destroyed his life completely. But then I remembered the audio recording. I remembered him agreeing with his vicious wife that I was just a batshit crazy old man who needed to be heavily medicated and locked away so they could maintain their luxury lifestyle. My sympathy vanished, replaced by cold, calculated resolve. "I will call the authorities right now," I said, my voice hardening. "I will hand over the USB drive." "No," Evelyn snapped sharply. "You will do absolutely nothing of the sort." I frowned in the darkness. "Why not? We have the proof. Because if you confront them now, they will backtrack," she explained, her voice full of brilliant, terrifying strategy. "If you show your hand today, Terrence will claim it was a desperate mistake. He will say he was stressed. Chloe will cry and play the victim. They might even convince a soft-hearted prosecutor to give them a plea deal for probation. We do not want them getting a slap on the wrist, Desmond. We want them completely annihilated." "So what is the play?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. "We play the quiet game," Evelyn said smoothly. "We let them build their glass house. We let them file that emergency conservatorship petition with the probate court. We let Chloe stand up in front of a judge, raise her right hand, and swear under penalty of perjury that you are violent and insane. We let Terrence submit that forged power of attorney as official evidence in a court of law." I smiled in the dark, finally understanding the sheer brilliance of her plan. If they submit the fake document to the judge, it becomes perjury and defrauding the court. "Exactly," Evelyn said, and I could practically hear the predatory grin on her face. "We let them walk right into the courtroom thinking they have already won. We let them dig their own graves so deep that no lawyer in the country will be able to pull them out. But Desmond, you have to be patient. You have to endure whatever psychological torture they put you through for the next few days. You have to play the part of the confused, fragile old man flawlessly." Can you do that? I have been pouring concrete and bending steel since before they were born, I replied quietly. I know how to endure. The next 5 days were an agonizing exercise in supreme self-control. I moved through my own house like a ghost. I allowed Chloe to speak to me as if I were a slow-witted child. I watched Terrence pace the hallways aggressively, whispering into his phone, promising his furious startup investors that a massive influx of capital was coming by the end of the month. He was so arrogant, so blindly confident in his plan to harvest my life savings that he did not even bother to hide his conversations anymore. He looked at me not as a father, but as a walking ATM machine that was about to be forcibly cracked open. I swallowed my pride. I kept my head down. I drank my coffee and watched them celebrate their impending victory, knowing that every single lie they told was another nail I would personally hammer into their coffin. The breaking point finally arrived on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in my armchair reading the morning paper when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the front hallway. I did not move. I waited for Chloe to answer it. I heard the heavy door swing open. A deep voice asked to speak to Desmond Wright. Chloe, trying to hide the triumphant glee in her voice, called out for me to come to the door. I shuffled slowly into the foyer, leaning heavily on the wall. Standing on my porch was a man in a cheap gray suit. He looked at me with a mixture of boredom and pity. "Desmond Wright?" he asked. I nodded slowly, putting on my best confused expression. The man thrust a thick, heavy manila envelope against my chest. "You have been served," he said flatly, turning around and walking quickly down the driveway. I stood in the foyer holding the heavy package. I did not need to open it to know what was inside. It was a formal emergency court summons. Chloe and Terrence had officially filed the petition for a permanent conservatorship. The legal machinery had been set into motion. They were demanding that the state strip away my basic human rights, seize my bank accounts, and grant them full legal authority to sell my historic property. I looked up at the top of the sweeping wooden staircase. Chloe was standing there, wrapped in an expensive silk robe, sipping a green detox smoothie. She was looking down at me, and she did not even bother to hide the vicious, victorious smile spreading across her pale face. "It is for your own good, Desmond," she said softly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You just cannot take care of yourself anymore. You are a danger to us and to yourself. Do not worry. The judge will make sure you are put somewhere nice and safe." I looked up at the woman who was trying to bury me alive. I let my hands shake as I held the court documents. I looked down at the floor, playing the part of a defeated, terrified old man. But inside, my blood was singing. The trap was officially set. They had committed their lies to the official legal record. They had locked themselves inside the building, and they had absolutely no idea that I was standing outside with the matches. The crisp morning air usually brought me peace, but today I could feel the storm brewing before the clouds even gathered. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring a fresh cup of dark roast coffee in my favorite ceramic mug. I had spent the last 40 years building a life of quiet respect in this historic neighborhood. I knew the mailman, I knew the local grocer, I knew Mrs. Jenkins across the street who always watered her hydrangeas at 8 in the morning. I was a pillar of this community, and Chloe knew exactly how much my reputation meant to me. That is why she chose to bring the circus directly to my front lawn. The heavy, aggressive thud of car doors slamming shut echoed through the street. I looked through the front window and saw 2 blue and white police cruisers parked haphazardly against my curb. The flashing lights painted the front of my brownstone in harsh, rhythmic strokes of red and blue. Stepping out from behind the lead officer was my daughter-in-law. Chloe was dressed like she was attending a high-society brunch, wearing a perfectly tailored beige trench coat, oversized designer sunglasses, and pristine white Gucci loafers. In her manicured hand, she gripped a thick stack of legal papers. She marched up my walkway with the supreme, terrifying confidence of a woman who believed she had just won the war. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The trap was moving right toward my front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped out onto the porch before they could even knock. Chloe stopped at the bottom of the steps, flanked by 2 large police officers. Mrs. Jenkins and several other neighbors had already stepped out onto their porches, watching the spectacle with wide eyes. Chloe saw the audience and immediately turned on the theatrical performance she had been rehearsing. "Officers, please be careful," Chloe announced, pitching her voice loud enough so it would carry across the entire street. "He is highly unpredictable. His dementia has made him aggressive. He does not even recognize his own family most days." The taller of the 2 officers stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable, his hand resting cautiously near his utility belt. "Mr. Wright," he said firmly, "we are here to execute a court-mandated psychiatric evaluation order. Your family has filed emergency paperwork stating that you are a danger to yourself and others. We need you to come with us to the hospital right now." I looked at the officer, then at Chloe. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her lips were curled into a smug, victorious smirk. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted my neighbors, the people I had known for decades, to watch me get escorted away in the back of a police cruiser like a raving lunatic. She wanted to strip away my dignity so completely that no one would ever question her authority over my estate. But Evelyn had warned me this might happen. My lawyer told me to let Chloe hang herself with her own rope. I just needed to give her a little push. I let my shoulders slump forward. I widened my eyes, making them look panicked and thoroughly confused. I began to tremble, letting the hot coffee in my mug slosh precariously near the brim. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, my voice cracking perfectly. "This is my house. I built this house. Who are you people? Why are you on my lawn?" Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh for the neighbors to hear. "Look at him, officers. It is completely pathetic. He is completely lost. Desmond," she cooed, taking a step up the porch, speaking to me as if I were a stray rabid dog. "We are just trying to help you. You are sick. You are not safe here anymore. You need to be locked away where professionals can watch you." She took another step up, invading my personal space. She reached out to grab my arm, her sharp fingernails digging into my jacket. "Do not touch me," I cried out, stepping backward clumsily. I let my hands shake violently. I pitched my weight forward just an inch, pretending to lose my balance in a moment of senile panic. As I stumbled, I deliberately tilted my ceramic mug. A wave of scalding hot, dark roast coffee splashed out of the cup and poured directly over Chloe's pristine white Gucci loafers and the bottom of her expensive designer trench coat. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The fake, caring daughter-in-law vanished in a millisecond. Chloe shrieked a high-pitched guttural sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She jumped back, looking down at her ruined luxury shoes, her face turning crimson with rage. "My shoes! Look at what you did to my shoes, you stupid old fool!" She lunged forward. She did not care about the police officers standing right behind her. She did not care about the neighbors watching from the sidewalk. The mask had completely shattered. Chloe reared her hand back and slapped me across the face with everything she had. The smack was deafening. It echoed off the brick walls of my home. My head snapped to the side. The sting radiated across my cheek, hot and sharp. The entire street gasped. The two police officers froze in absolute shock. "You batshit crazy old man!" Chloe screamed. Her face contorted into a mask of pure ugliness. "I will lock you away in an asylum. I am going to sell this rotting house and leave you to rot in a cheap diaper. You are nothing. You hear me? You are nothing!" One of the officers finally snapped out of his shock and lunged forward, grabbing Chloe by the arm and pulling her aggressively away from me. "Ma'am, step back right now." The second officer stepped toward me, pulling out his handcuffs. He looked panicked, assessing the situation as a volatile domestic dispute. "Sir, put the mug down and put your hands behind your back for your own safety." I did not put my hands behind my back. I did not tremble. The frail, confused old man posture disappeared instantly. I stood up perfectly straight. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing with a calm, deliberate click. I looked the officer dead in the eye, my voice dropping back to its natural, commanding baritone. "Put the handcuffs away, officer. I am not the one you need to restrain." The officer hesitated completely, thrown off by my sudden lucid shift in demeanor. "But the paperwork says you are erratic." I pointed a steady, unwavering finger up toward the ceiling of my porch. Nestled perfectly in the corner of the brickwork directly above the front door was a high-definition 4K security camera with a glowing red recording light. "I am not erratic," I said loudly, my voice booming across the lawn so every single neighbor could hear. "I am a retired structural engineer who knows how to wire a full surveillance system. My mind is sharper than it has ever been. And that camera just recorded this woman trespassing on my porch, verbally harassing me, and committing felony battery against a senior citizen." Chloe stopped struggling against the other officer. The blood completely drained from her face as her eyes followed my finger up to the camera. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked back at the officer holding the handcuffs. "If you want to check the footage to see who is actually assaulting an elderly person, I would be more than happy to invite you inside to review the server. Otherwise, I suggest you take this violent, hysterical woman off my property before I press criminal charges for elder abuse." The officers exchanged a nervous, loaded look. They realized instantly that they had been played. They had been used as pawns by a greedy woman trying to intimidate her father-in-law. The officer holding Chloe let go of her arm, looking at her with absolute disgust. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "the psychiatric hold requires the subject to be a clear, unprovoked danger to themselves or others. This man is completely lucid, and you just assaulted him in front of law enforcement." "We cannot execute this order. You have to take him," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "He is faking it. He is a master manipulator. My husband has the paperwork. Get off his property," the officer commanded, his hand resting on his radio. "Right now, or I will arrest you for battery." Chloe stood on my lawn, trembling with a mixture of humiliation and blinding rage. She looked around and saw Mrs. Jenkins and the other neighbors glaring at her with absolute contempt. She had come here to strip me of my dignity, but she was the one standing in ruined shoes, completely exposed as a monster. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her eyes filled with venom. "You think you are so smart?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a dark, venomous whisper. "You think a camera is going to save you? We are taking you to court, Desmond. We are going to stand in front of a judge, and I swear to God I will destroy you. I will strip you of everything you own." I looked down at her from the top of my porch stairs, feeling nothing but cold pity. "I will see you in court, Chloe," I replied calmly. "Make sure you wear different shoes." The police officers escorted her back to her vehicle. I watched her drive away, leaving wet tire tracks on the asphalt. I touched my stinging cheek. It hurt, but the pain was a brilliant reminder that I had successfully drawn the enemy out into the open. The battle lines were officially drawn, and next week, in the cold, unforgiving light of a federal courtroom, I was going to bury her. The phantom sting of Chloe slapping my face was still fresh on my skin as I sat across the polished mahogany desk in Evelyn Vance's downtown law office. We had exactly 3 days until the emergency conservatorship hearing. 3 days until my own son and his vicious wife stood before a federal judge and tried to legally strip away my humanity. But I was not spending those 72 hours trembling in fear. I was not sitting at home weeping over a broken family. I was spending every waking minute moving my financial chess pieces across a board they did not even know existed. People often mistake silence for a lack of accomplishment. Because I drove a 12-year-old pickup truck, wore steel-toed boots, and shopped at local hardware stores, Terrence and Chloe naturally assumed my net worth was tied entirely to my historic brownstone and a standard, accessible retirement account. They thought I was just a blue-collar worker who got lucky with gentrified real estate. What they did not know was that 10 years ago, I sat in this exact same office with Evelyn and made the smartest financial decision of my entire life. I had seen too many hardworking black men build incredible legacies from the dirt, up only to have them picked apart by greedy relatives, corrupt lawyers, or predatory medical facilities the moment their hair turned gray. I refused to let my blood, sweat, and tears be auctioned off to the highest bidder while I was trapped in a hospital bed. So a decade ago, I established an airtight, bulletproof, irrevocable trust. Evelyn poured 2 cups of black coffee, handing one to me as she opened her laptop. Once an asset goes into an irrevocable trust, it effectively no longer belongs to the individual. It belongs to the trust itself, managed by a designated trustee, and it is shielded entirely from creditors' lawsuits and, most importantly, greedy children waving forged power of attorney documents. I had intentionally left a few decoy accounts open with modest balances over the years to avoid raising any suspicion. That was the account where Chloe had managed to steal the $8,500. I let her have that appetizer. I let her feel like a master thief. But the main course was strictly off limits. Over the next 48 hours, Evelyn and I worked relentlessly. With a few secure digital signatures and authorized wire transfers, we drained every single remaining liquid asset I possessed outside of the trust. Savings accounts, mutual funds, emergency cash reserves. We liquidated it all and funneled the cash directly into a specialized educational and living trust established solely for my granddaughter Maya. Maya had risked everything to bring me that stolen flash drive. She had proven her loyalty, and I was going to ensure her future was entirely protected from the financial ruin her father was about to endure. By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, my personal bank accounts showed balances of practically zero. If Terrence and Chloe somehow managed to bribe the judge, if they somehow won their fraudulent conservatorship with their fake medical documents, they would inherit absolute dust. They would win control over a financial ghost. But simply hiding my money was not enough. Evelyn and I were not playing defense anymore. We were loading the heavy artillery. I reached into my leather jacket and handed Evelyn a thick, sealed manila envelope I had retrieved from my private safe deposit box that morning. She opened it, carefully scanning the documents inside. A predatory, deeply satisfied smile slowly spread across her face. "Let us talk about the $1 million mansion in Buckhead," I said smoothly, leaning back in my chair. The one Terrence and Chloe love to brag about at their high society dinner parties. The one they use to pretend they are part of the city's elite class. 8 years ago, when Terrence wanted to buy that sprawling estate to impress his tech friends and his new demanding wife, his credit score was absolute garbage. No traditional bank would touch him. His debt-to-income ratio was a massive red flag. He was desperate. He came to me begging for a massive loan. I wanted to teach him responsibility, so I did not just hand him cash. I set up a private, anonymous, limited liability company to act as his official mortgage lender. Terrence and Chloe have been paying their monthly mortgage directly to my company for 8 years, completely unaware that their quiet, supposedly naive father is the sole owner of the holding company. And according to my financial records, because Terrence's startup has been failing so miserably, they have missed their last 6 mortgage payments. They have been funneling their mortgage money into buying designer clothes, luxury vacations, and bribing corrupt doctors to lock me away. Evelyn looked up from the paperwork, her eyes gleaming with ruthless legal anticipation. "You hold the deed in default," she said, her voice dropping to a low, thrilled whisper. "You want to trigger the default clause right now." I nodded slowly, letting the cold reality of the situation settle into the room. "I want you to draft the foreclosure and emergency eviction notices, Evelyn. I want the paperwork ironclad. I want them filed with the county clerk and ready to be served the exact second we are standing inside that courtroom. They want to throw me out of my home to pay their debts. I am going to show them what it actually feels like to be thrown out onto the street." We spent the rest of the weekend finalizing the legal trap. Everything was locked, loaded, and completely invisible to the enemy. On Sunday night, less than 12 hours before we were scheduled to appear in federal court, I was sitting alone in my dark living room. My phone buzzed aggressively on the kitchen counter. I looked at the glowing caller identification screen. It was Terrence. I let it ring 3 times before I finally picked it up, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a single word. I wanted him to speak first. I wanted to hear exactly what kind of lie he had prepared for the eve of his ultimate betrayal. Dad Terrence's voice came through the speaker, thick and wet. He was crying, or at least he was putting on a phenomenal performance of a man crying. "Dad, please talk to me. This whole situation has gotten so completely out of hand. I just want you to know how much it breaks my heart to have to do this tomorrow." I listened to the wet sniffles on the other end of the line, feeling absolutely nothing. The father who loved him had died the moment I saw my forged signature on that power of attorney document. "Chloe and I are just terrified for your safety," Terrence whimpered, layering the emotional manipulation thick and heavy. "You are not yourself anymore. You are getting aggressive with people. You are forgetting things. You assaulted Chloe on the porch. We are doing this because we love you, Dad. We are doing this to protect you from hurting yourself. Please, I am begging you, just cooperate tomorrow. Do not make the judge force you into a lockdown facility. Just let me take over your affairs gracefully. It is for your own good." He waited for a response. He waited for the confused, terrified old man to break down, apologize, and surrender his entire life to his loving, benevolent son. He wanted me to give up without a fight so he would not have to look me in the eye while he destroyed me. I took a slow, deep breath. My voice was as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm carrying 40 years of hard truths and shattered illusions. "I will see you in court, Terrence." I hung up the phone and turned it off. The game was officially over. Tomorrow, the execution would begin. The heavy oak doors of the Atlanta Federal Courthouse closed behind me with a loud, final thud. Inside courtroom number 4, the air was cold and sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I walked down the center aisle with my head held high, my posture perfectly straight. I wore the dark charcoal suit I had tailored 10 years ago. Beside me walked Evelyn Vance wearing a striking crimson blazer. She moved with the quiet, lethal grace of a predator who had already cornered its prey. We took our seats at the defense table. Across the aisle, sitting at the petitioner table, were my son Terrence and his wife Chloe. They had clearly spent hours preparing their visual performance for the judge. Terrence wore a plain, inexpensive navy suit. He slumped in his chair, rubbing his face repeatedly to project the image of a deeply exhausted, heartbroken son. Chloe had completely abandoned her usual flashy designer wardrobe. She wore a modest, pale blue dress that covered her collarbones. Her hair was pulled back plainly, and she wore virtually no makeup, intentionally making herself look pale, fragile, and emotionally drained. Beside them stood their attorney, a slick, sharp-featured man named Bradley Thorne. He wore a custom-tailored suit and a smile of absolute arrogant certainty. He looked at Evelyn and me with mild amusement, as if we were nothing more than a minor speed bump on his path to a massive payday. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Arthur Mitchell. He was a stern, older white man with thick silver hair and a reputation for having zero tolerance for nonsense in his courtroom. He sat down heavily behind the elevated wooden bench, adjusted his reading glasses, and stared down at the petition files before him with a deeply serious expression. Counselor Thorne stood up to deliver his opening statement. He walked slowly toward the center of the room, using his hands to paint a tragic, heartbreaking picture for the judge. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice dripping with practiced sorrow, "we are here today to perform an act of mercy. The man sitting across from me, Desmond Wright, was once a pillar of this community. He was a brilliant contractor and a dedicated father. But time is a cruel thief, Your Honor. The man who built those buildings is no longer there. His mind has been entirely ravaged by severe, rapid cognitive decline. He is no longer capable of making rational decisions. He is no longer capable of caring for his own basic human needs. We are asking this court to grant full permanent conservatorship to his son Terrence so that this family can finally place Mr. Wright in a secure medical facility where he can no longer be a danger to himself or to the innocent people around him." I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of stone. I did not react. I did not shake my head. I let Thorne fill the quiet courtroom with his disgusting lies. Thorne called his first and primary witness to the stand. Chloe stood up slowly, clutching a small white tissue in her trembling hands. She walked to the witness box, placed her left hand on the Bible, raised her right hand, and swore an oath before God and the judge to tell the whole truth. She sat down looking small and terrified, playing the role of the victimized daughter-in-law to absolute perfection. "Mrs. Wright," Thorne asked gently, "can you please describe to the court what it has been like living with your father-in-law over these past few months?" Chloe brought the tissue to her eyes, letting out a soft, rehearsed sob. "It has been an absolute nightmare," she whispered, her voice cracking beautifully. "We have tried so hard to take care of him. We love him so much. But he is completely losing his grip on reality. Can you give the court some specific examples?" Thorne prompted. Chloe nodded, looking up at Judge Mitchell with wide, tear-filled eyes. "He forgets to turn off the gas stove almost every single day. My husband and I wake up in the middle of the night terrified that the historic house is going to explode and kill us all. He wanders the hallways at 3 a.m. carrying heavy metal tools from his old construction days. He mutters to himself. He does not know what year it is. He cannot even manage his own basic personal hygiene anymore. He refuses to bathe. It breaks my heart to see a once proud man reduced to this state, but he is completely incapable of taking care of himself." I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Of all the lies she had told attacking my personal dignity, claiming that a proud black man who ironed his shirts and polished his shoes every Sunday was wandering around filthy and unwashed, was the most infuriating. But I felt Evelyn place a calm, reassuring hand on my wrist under the table. "Let her dig the hole," Desmond, Evelyn whispered so quietly that only I could hear. "Let her dig it as deep as she possibly can." And then Thorne guided Chloe to the grand finale of her performance. "Mrs. Wright," he said softly, "can you tell the court about the incident that occurred last week on the front porch of the residence? The incident that forced you and your husband to seek emergency legal intervention?" Chloe let out a loud, dramatic gasp. She covered her mouth with her trembling hands, letting a few genuine tears squeeze out of her eyes. She was an incredible actress. "I was just trying to help him," Chloe cried out, her voice echoing off the high ceiling of the courtroom. "We had arranged for a private medical professional to come check his vitals because we were so worried. When I approached him on the porch to gently guide him inside, he just completely snapped. His eyes went totally blank. He became a different person. He threw a mug of boiling hot coffee directly at my legs. And when I screamed in pain, he lunged at me. She paused, looking directly at Judge Mitchell to ensure she had his full sympathy. He was like a wild animal. "Your Honor," Chloe sobbed hysterically. "He threatened me. He called me terrible names. He is a batshit crazy old man, and if the police had not arrived when they did, I genuinely believe he would have killed me right there on the front porch. He has lost his mind. He absolutely cannot be trusted." The courtroom erupted into a low, scandalous murmur. The gallery of spectators whispered among themselves in shock. Judge Mitchell banged his wooden gavel twice, demanding order in the court. His face was deeply lined with concern. He looked down at me from his elevated bench, his eyes filled with the exact kind of pity you give to a rabid dog that needs to be put down. Chloe wiped her tears, her chest heaving with fake, traumatic sobs. She looked absolutely exhausted, like a woman who had fought a long, terrifying battle and was finally seeking refuge in the arms of the justice system. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor," Thorne said, turning his back to the judge and walking toward his table. As Thorne sat down next to Terrence, he could not hide the deeply arrogant, victorious smile spreading across his face. He leaned over and patted Terrence on the shoulder. Terrence looked at Chloe in the witness box and offered her a small, reassuring nod. They believed it was over. They believed they had completely destroyed my credibility. They had successfully painted the picture of a dangerous, filthy, insane old man who needed to be locked in a cage and stripped of his constitutional rights. In their minds, the multi-million-dollar historic brownstone was already sold. The massive startup debts were already paid. The victory was 100% guaranteed. They had no idea that their entire performance was nothing more than the opening act of their own funeral. Chloe was not just giving testimony. She was putting on a masterclass in manipulation. I sat perfectly still in my charcoal suit beside Evelyn, listening as my daughter-in-law painted a horrifying, entirely fictional portrait of my supposed descent into madness. She told the court about nights I supposedly wandered the dark hallways of my historic brownstone, screaming at ghosts and talking to walls. She described finding the gas stove left on, claiming she woke up coughing from the fumes and had to drag my confused, rambling body out of the kitchen to save our lives. Her lawyer, Bradley Thorne, guided her through the fabricated stories with the smooth, oily precision of an orchestra conductor. Every question he asked was carefully designed to make her look like an exhausted, terrified saint, and to make me look like a ticking time bomb waiting to destroy my own family. The gallery behind us was completely captivated. I could hear the faint gasps from the spectators and the uneasy shifting of wooden benches. They were buying every single word she said. Terrence sat at the petitioner table with his head bowed, occasionally wiping a dry eye. He looked exactly like a heartbroken son forced into an impossible corner. But I knew the absolute truth. I knew my son was just praying the judge would hurry up and sign the conservatorship order so he could sell my home and pay off his massive startup debts before the federal investigators knocked on his door. Thorne finished his direct examination with a solemn, dramatic nod to the judge and took his seat. The courtroom was silent, heavy with the manufactured tragedy of my existence. Judge Mitchell looked over his reading glasses at our table, his face a mask of judicial neutrality. He asked if the defense wished to cross-examine the witness. Evelyn Vance stood up slowly. She buttoned her striking crimson blazer, taking her time, letting the silence stretch out and make Chloe sweat just a little bit. Evelyn walked to the center of the room with the lethal grace of a predator. She did not raise her voice. She did not look angry. She looked mildly curious, which I knew from experience was when she was at her most dangerous. "Mrs. Wright," Evelyn began, her voice smooth as glass but carrying perfectly across the large room. "You have testified that my client is violently unstable, deeply confused, and entirely incapable of managing his own life or his substantial estate. You have sworn under oath that he is a severe danger to you and your husband." Chloe lifted her chin, her confidence fully restored now that she was the center of attention again. "Yes," Chloe answered, putting a slight theatrical tremble in her voice. "That is exactly what I am saying. It has been a living nightmare. We are absolutely terrified of him." Evelyn paced slowly in front of the witness box, the click of her heels echoing sharply. "So terrified that you felt the only solution was to completely strip this man of his basic human rights. You want this court to believe that Desmond Wright, a man who safely and successfully managed million-dollar commercial construction sites across this city for 40 years, cannot even remember to turn off a kitchen stove." Chloe leaned forward, Her mask of the fragile victim was starting to slip just a fraction of an inch as her natural ugly arrogance flared up. She hated being questioned. She hated being challenged by a confident black woman. "I do not care what he built 40 years ago," Chloe snapped, her voice rising in pitch and losing its fake sweetness. "I care about what he is doing right now in my house." Evelyn stopped pacing. She turned on her heel and looked Chloe dead in the eyes. "In your house. Let the official record reflect that the property in question is owned solely and entirely by Desmond Wright. But moving on. You claim he assaulted you. You claim he is entirely detached from reality. I am giving you one final opportunity to clarify your statements for the court, Mrs. Wright. Is it your sworn testimony today that Desmond Wright is medically and legally insane?" Chloe gripped the wooden edges of the witness stand so hard her knuckles turned white. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. She lost her temper completely, forgetting the fragile act, forgetting the stern judge sitting right next to her, forgetting everything except her blinding hatred for me and her desperate greed. "He is a batshit crazy old man," Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet courtroom like a jagged blade. "He has lost his mind. He cannot be trusted with a single dime of his own money or a single decision in his life. He needs to be locked away." The crude, hateful words echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings. The gallery gasped in collective shock. At the petitioner table, Thorne buried his face in his hands, realizing his client had just completely shattered the sympathetic victim illusion he had worked so hard to build. But Chloe did not care. She glared at me from the witness stand, breathing heavily, her chest heaving with triumphant rage. She thought she had won. She thought that shouting me down and embarrassing me in a federal courtroom was the final nail in my coffin. She thought she had established absolute dominance. Then came the sound that stopped her heart. A single incredibly sharp crack of a wooden gavel. Bang! Judge Mitchell leaned far forward over his elevated wooden bench. The stern, patient demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire morning had completely vanished. His jaw was set like granite. His eyes were narrowed into cold, sharp slits. The courtroom fell so incredibly silent you could hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning vents. Judge Mitchell did not look at the defense lawyer. He did not look at my son Terrence. He locked his furious, unforgiving gaze directly onto Chloe's pale face. "Mrs. Wright," the judge said, his voice rumbling through the room like distant thunder. "Are you absolutely sure you want to continue with these accusations under oath?" The question hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Chloe froze instantly. The aggressive, arrogant fire in her eyes flickered and died out in a fraction of a second. She looked around the room in pure, unadulterated confusion. She looked over at her expensive lawyer, but Thorne was staring down at his legal pad, his smug confidence entirely evaporated. He would not even make eye contact with her. "What do you mean?" Chloe stammered, her voice shrinking back down to a pathetic whisper. "I am telling the truth." Judge Mitchell did not blink. He did not break eye contact with her for a single second. "You are under oath in a federal court of law," he continued, his tone absolutely ruthless. "Perjury is not a minor mistake. It is not a slap on the wrist, it is a felony. Defrauding this court in an attempt to seize an elderly citizen's estate is a severe punishable crime. I have read the preliminary filings submitted to my chambers this morning. I will ask you one last time, and I strongly suggest you think about your answer. Do you stand by the claim that this man is incompetent and violently unstable?" Chloe swallowed hard. The color completely drained from her face. She looked like a ghost standing trapped in the witness box. Her arrogance was replaced by the terrifying realization that the ground beneath her was giving way. But she was in too deep. She had already bet her entire life on this lie. She managed a weak, trembling nod. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Mitchell leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He let out a long, heavy breath that sounded a lot like profound disappointment. "Very well," the judge said flatly, his tone signaling that he was done showing any mercy. "Counselor Vance, you indicated in your preliminary filings this morning that you had substantial physical evidence contradicting the petitioner's entire narrative. You may proceed." Evelyn Vance smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the terrifying, brilliant smile of an executioner who had just been handed the axe. She turned her back on Chloe, who was now trembling uncontrollably on the stand, and walked slowly back to our defense table. I did not move a single muscle, but inside my chest, my soul was roaring with victory. Evelyn reached down to our table and picked up a thick, incredibly heavy stack of manila folders. These were not just standard medical records. These folders contained the bank statements showing the money they had stolen from my retirement accounts. They contained the digital footprints of the federal wire fraud Terrence had committed. They held the high-definition security recordings from my living room where they had plotted my demise and the video from my front porch where Chloe had physically assaulted me. And most importantly, nestled right in the center was the undeniable proof of the bribe they had paid to Dr. Harrison. Evelyn stood tall in the center of the courtroom. She held the massive stack of evidence in her hands, tapping the thick edges against the wooden table, letting the heavy physical weight of their impending destruction speak for itself. Terrence was staring at the folders from across the aisle, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. He knew I was a meticulous man, but he never imagined I would bring a wrecking ball into a courtroom. Chloe sat in the witness box completely paralyzed. The arrogant, wealthy daughter-in-law who had called me a crazy old man was gone. In her place was a terrified criminal realizing the prison doors had just been securely locked from the outside. Evelyn Vance did not even look at Chloe as she dismissed her from the witness box. Chloe stumbled slightly as she walked back to the petitioner table. Her pale blue dress suddenly looked entirely out of place on a woman who was visibly sweating. She sank into her chair next to Terrence, her hands trembling so violently that she had to hide them under the wooden table. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice projecting effortlessly across the grand courtroom. "At this time, the defense would like to call Dr. Arthur Harrison to the stand." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Dr. Harrison walked down the center aisle looking like a man who owned the entire building. He wore the same custom-tailored navy blue suit he had worn to my house. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his chin was held high. He walked with the arrogant, unbothered stride of a wealthy medical professional who was used to people taking his word as absolute gospel. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking directly into a slaughterhouse. He stepped into the witness box, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore the oath. He sat down and adjusted his expensive silk tie, offering Judge Mitchell a polite, collegial nod. Dr. Harrison Evelyn began walking slowly toward the center podium. "You submitted a sworn medical affidavit to this court stating that you personally evaluated my client Desmond Wright. In your professional medical opinion, what is his current cognitive state?" Dr. Harrison cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. He spoke with that same slow, patronizing tone he had used in my living room. "I conducted a thorough evaluation of Mr. Wright at his home last week. Unfortunately, he is suffering from severe late-stage cognitive decline. He was entirely disoriented. He did not know what year it was. He could not answer basic mathematical questions. In my expert medical opinion, he is completely unfit to manage his own estate and poses a significant danger to himself and his family. A conservatorship is absolutely medically necessary." Evelyn stopped walking. She rested her hands on the podium and looked at him with an expression of mild amusement. "You are absolutely certain of this diagnosis, doctor?" "I have been practicing medicine for 25 years, counselor," Dr. Harrison replied, a hint of annoyance creeping into his arrogant voice. "I am absolutely certain." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Dr. Harrison, have you ever accepted financial compensation outside of standard medical billing procedures in exchange for falsifying a medical diagnosis?" The question hit the courtroom like a physical strike. The opposing lawyer, Bradley Thorne, instantly jumped to his feet shouting an objection. He claimed Evelyn was badgering the witness and making baseless, defamatory accusations. Judge Mitchell held up a hand, silencing Thorne immediately. The judge looked down at Evelyn with a serious, narrowed gaze. "Counselor Vance," Judge Mitchell warned, "you are walking a very dangerous line. I assume you have concrete evidence to support the implication behind that question." "I have much more than an implication, Your Honor," Evelyn replied smoothly. "I ask the court for permission to play Defense Exhibit A on the courtroom monitors." Judge Mitchell granted permission. Evelyn handed a small flash drive to the court clerk. A moment later, the large flat-screen televisions mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. At first, the screen showed the empty, dimly lit hallway of my historic brownstone. But the audio was terrifyingly clear. It was the high-definition recording I had captured by taping my smartphone under the coffee table while I pretended to use the bathroom. The entire courtroom heard the sickeningly sweet tone evaporate from Chloe's voice. They heard her ask if the evaluation was enough. They heard Dr. Harrison laugh and say that I was completely detached from reality and that he could easily write me up as severely incapacitated. Dr. Harrison went completely rigid in the witness box. The arrogant color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. He gripped the edges of the wooden stand, staring up at the monitors in absolute paralyzing horror. Then the audio continued. The entire courtroom listened in dead silence as Chloe explicitly demanded that he make the medical record look as bad as possible. They heard her confess that they were out of time and needed to seize my house before Terrence went bankrupt. And then they heard the undeniable sound of Dr. Harrison agreeing to file the certified documents by Monday morning in exchange for double his usual under-the-table fee. The gallery erupted. People gasped out loud. A heavy collective murmur of disgust rolled through the spectator benches. Judge Mitchell banged his gavel violently demanding order, but his own face was red with pure, unadulterated fury. He glared at Dr. Harrison with a look that could melt steel. Evelyn was not finished. She waited for the room to quiet down before she delivered the final fatal blow. "If the audio recording is not sufficient for this court," Evelyn announced calmly, turning to look directly at Chloe, "we also have a visual aid. You see, Your Honor. My client recently discovered that his daughter-in-law had secretly installed a hidden surveillance camera in his living room to spy on him. What she failed to realize is that my client is a retired structural engineer who easily bypassed her cheap network security. We retrieved the footage from her own spy camera. Please play Exhibit B." The monitors switched to a new video file. It was perfectly clear footage from the hidden camera under my television stand. The angle captured the living room perfectly. It showed Dr. Harrison sitting on my velvet sofa, and it showed Chloe standing right in front of him. The video clearly showed Chloe reaching into her designer handbag, pulling out a massive, thick white envelope overflowing with $100 bills, and handing it directly to Dr. Harrison. It showed the doctor smiling, opening his leather briefcase and slipping the bribe inside before packing up his fake medical evaluation. Bradley Thorne dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the petitioner table. He slowly moved his chair away from Terrence and Chloe, physically distancing himself from his own clients. He realized instantly that his legal career was in jeopardy just by sitting next to them. Evelyn turned her attention back to the witness box. Dr. Harrison was sweating profusely. Large beads of perspiration rolled down his forehead and soaked into the collar of his expensive shirt. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked like a man having a massive heart attack. Dr. Harrison, Evelyn said, her voice ringing out like a judge reading a death sentence. "Is that you on the screen, accepting a cash bribe to falsely declare an elderly man legally insane?" Dr. Harrison opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked desperately at Bradley Thorne, but Thorne was staring at the ceiling, completely abandoning him. Dr. Harrison swallowed hard. His entire body was shaking. He leaned into the microphone, his voice barely a terrified whisper. On the advice of my legal counsel, he stammered, his voice breaking. "I decline to answer that question on the grounds that my answer may incriminate me." He was pleading the Fifth Amendment. He was admitting his guilt in front of a federal judge. Judge Mitchell did not just look angry. He looked absolutely lethal. The judge stood up behind his bench, his black robe billowing around him. He pointed a long, furious finger directly at the witness box. "I will not tolerate medical corruption and extortion in my courtroom," Judge Mitchell roared, his voice booming like cannon fire. "The medical affidavit submitted by this man is immediately stricken from the official record. Bailiff, take Dr. Harrison into custody right now. Hold him in the courthouse detention center pending a full federal investigation for medical fraud, perjury, and accepting bribes." Two large armed court bailiffs immediately marched down the aisle. They stepped up to the witness box, grabbed Dr. Harrison by his expensive suit jacket, and hauled him to his feet. The cold, sharp sound of metal handcuffs clicking and locking securely around the doctor's wrists echoed through the silent courtroom. Dr. Harrison did not fight back. He kept his head bowed in absolute disgrace as the bailiffs marched him down the center aisle and out the heavy wooden doors. The man who had walked in like a king had just been dragged out like a common criminal. I turned my head very slowly and looked across the aisle at the petitioner table. Terrence had buried his face entirely in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent panic. But it was Chloe who caught my attention. She was no longer sitting up straight. She was hunched over, clutching her stomach as if she were going to be violently ill. Her eyes were wide, staring blankly at the empty witness box, where her hired gun had just been arrested. She was physically trembling, her teeth chattering in sheer terror. She had brought me to court to strip me of my dignity. She had called me a crazy old man. But now she was finally realizing that the quiet, patient black man she had underestimated was methodically locking all the doors and setting her entire world on fire. And Evelyn was just getting started. My daughter-in-law dragged me into court, pointing her manicured finger at me and calling me a batshit crazy old man in front of a packed room. She claimed I had lost my mind. She told the judge I was a danger to myself and could not be trusted with my own estate. Her high-priced lawyer stood beside her smiling with absolute confidence, certain they were about to strip away everything I had built over 40 years. That was until the judge banged his gavel, looked straight at her, and asked a single question. Are you absolutely sure you want to continue with these accusations under oath? The courtroom fell dead silent. Moments later, the judge ruled in my favor, and I watched the color completely drain from her pale face. But before I tell you how a 72-year-old retired contractor dismantled their entire lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respecting your elders is a rule, not an option. The echo of the heavy wooden doors closing behind the disgraced doctor was still ringing in the silent courtroom. The air was thick, suffocating, completely stripped of the arrogant confidence that had filled it just an hour earlier. Bradley Thorne, the high-priced lawyer my son had hired, sat perfectly rigid, staring a hole into his legal pad. He was mentally calculating how to save his own license, completely abandoning the sinking ship he was currently sitting on. I sat next to Evelyn Vance. She did not take a sip of water. She did not sit down. She simply adjusted the cuffs of her crimson blazer, looked directly at the petitioner table, and spoke with the casual, terrifying calm of a hunter who had just cornered her second prey. Your Honor, Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the vast room. The defense calls Terrence Wright to the stand. Terrence physically flinched. He looked at Thorne, silently begging his lawyer to object, to save him, to do absolutely anything. But Thorne simply kept his eyes glued to the table and gave a microscopic shake of his head. Terrence was completely on his own. My son stood up. The man who had walked into this courthouse looking like a tragic, concerned hero now looked like a man walking to the gallows. His legs were visibly shaking. He dragged his feet down the center aisle, placed a sweaty hand on the Bible, and swore the oath. His voice was a thin, trembling whisper. Evelyn approached the podium. She did not bring a stack of folders this time. She only brought a single, sleek, silver USB drive. She placed it gently on the wooden surface, tapping it once with her fingernail. I saw Maya sitting quietly in the back row of the gallery offer me a faint, brave smile. Mr. Wright, Evelyn began, her tone deceptively polite. You are the chief executive officer of a local technology startup, is that correct? Terrence cleared his throat, desperately trying to summon the ghost of his former arrogance. Yes, he replied, his voice cracking slightly. That is correct. And would you say this business venture is successful? Evelyn asked. Would you characterize your current financial situation as stable? Terrence hesitated. He looked at the judge, then at Chloe, who was glaring at him with wild, warning eyes. Yes, Terrence swallowed hard. We have had some challenges like any new company, but yes, we are financially stable. Evelyn smiled. It was a cold, devastating smile. Your Honor, I ask that the court clerk display Defense Exhibit C on the monitors. The large screens flickered. The digital files from the stolen USB drive appeared for the entire courtroom to see. Evelyn did not start with the forgery. She started by dismantling his pride. Mr. Wright. Evelyn continued, her voice growing sharper. These are internal financial audits and default notices sent to your personal email by your primary venture capital investors. According to these documents, your startup is not successful. In fact, it is entirely bankrupt. You currently owe your investors $1.5 million of debt that was called in for immediate repayment exactly 3 days ago. Is that accurate? Terrence gripped the edges of the witness stand. The color drained from his face. How did you get those? He stammered, completely ignoring the judge. I am asking the questions, Mr. Wright. Evelyn fired back, her voice cracking like a whip. Did you or did you not falsify user metrics to secure funding, committing investor fraud, and leaving you $1.5 million in debt? Terrence looked at his lap. He could not speak. The silence was an absolute admission of guilt. Let the record reflect the witness's silence, Evelyn said smoothly. Now let us discuss how a man drowning in $1.5 million of debt suddenly decides his wealthy father belongs in a psychiatric ward. Let us look at Exhibit D. The screen changed. It displayed a highlighted bank transfer log. It was the exact transaction alert I had received on my phone just days ago. On Tuesday evening, Evelyn explained, pacing slowly in front of the jury box, exactly $8,500 was electronically transferred out of my client's private retirement account. The IP address used to initiate this transfer matches the secure wireless network of your home in Buckhead. Did you steal your father's retirement funds to keep your lights on, Mr. Wright? I did not steal anything. Terrence burst out, his voice high and panicked. "We are on his accounts. We were just managing his care. We needed to pay for his medical evaluations." Evelyn let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You needed his money to pay the doctor you were bribing to lock him away. That is a fascinating legal defense, Mr. Wright. I am sure the federal prosecutors will love to hear it." Terrence was hyperventilating now. He was a man drowning, thrashing wildly in the water, dragging himself deeper into the abyss. Chloe was sitting at the table, her hands covering her face, realizing that their entire financial ruin was now a matter of public record. But Evelyn was not finished. She saved the ultimate kill shot for last. She walked back to the defense table, picked up a single sheet of paper inside a clear plastic sleeve, and approached the witness box. She handed it to the bailiff, who placed it directly in front of my son. "Mr. Wright," Evelyn said, dropping her voice to a deadly quiet register. "This is an emergency power of attorney document. It was recovered from the digital files you transmitted to a commercial real estate broker earlier this week. This document claims to grant you total unchecked authority over your father's estate, his bank accounts, and his historic property." "Do you recognize this document?" Terrence stared at the paper as if it were coated in poison. He was trembling so violently the microphone on the stand picked up the rattling of his breath. "Yes," he whispered. "And whose signature is at the bottom of that page?" Evelyn asked. Terrence closed his eyes. "My father's." He lied, though he had absolutely no conviction left in his soul. Evelyn leaned forward, placing both hands on the wooden railing of the witness box, trapping him in her gaze. "My client spent 40 years drafting architectural blueprints, Mr. Wright. His signature is as precise as a printed font. We had this document analyzed by an independent forensic calligrapher yesterday morning. The pressure, the slant, the hesitation marks, they do not match my client, but they perfectly match the signature on your own driver's license." Terrence opened his eyes. He looked at me, sitting completely stoic at the defense table. He was searching for the father who used to fix his scraped knees, the father who used to pay his debts. But that man was dead. I looked back at him with the cold, unforgiving eyes of a man watching a stranger burn. "I am going to ask you one final time, Mr. Wright," Evelyn commanded, her voice echoing like a thunderclap. "And remember that perjury in a federal court carries a mandatory prison sentence. Did you forge your father's signature on a legal document to steal his home and pay off your massive fraudulent debts?" The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the blood pumping in your own ears. Judge Mitchell leaned over his bench, glaring down at my son. "Answer the question, Mr. Wright." Terrence completely broke. The arrogant tech CEO shattered into a million pathetic pieces. He buried his face in his hands and began to sob hysterically. He wept like a frightened child caught in a lie. But he did not accept responsibility. A coward never does. Terrence suddenly lifted his head, his face red and streaked with tears, and pointed a trembling accusatory finger directly across the courtroom at his wife. "She made me do it." Terrence screamed, his voice breaking in sheer desperation. "Chloe made me sign it. She told me the investors were going to put me in prison. She told me she would divorce me and take everything if I did not get the money. It was her idea to bribe the doctor. It was her idea to forge the paper. I did not want to do it. I swear to God she manipulated me. She is the one who wanted to lock him away." The gallery erupted into absolute chaos. People were loudly gasping, shaking their heads in disgust at the spectacle of a husband completely throwing his wife to the wolves to save his own skin. At the petitioner table, Chloe snapped. The fragile, abused woman act completely disintegrated. She shot up from her chair, her face contorted in pure demonic rage. "You pathetic, spineless coward," Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice entirely stripped of any high society refinement. "You are blaming me. You are the one who bankrupted us. You are the idiot who could not run a simple business. I should have left you years ago. You are a weak, miserable excuse for a man." Judge Mitchell was slamming his wooden gavel down so hard I thought the handle would splinter. "Order! Order in this courtroom right now," he roared, but Chloe could not be stopped. She was pointing at Terrence, screaming obscenities, completely ignoring the federal judge, the armed bailiffs, and the packed gallery. Terrence was screaming back at her from the witness stand, sobbing that she had ruined his life, that she was a gold digger who had poisoned his family. I sat at the defense table watching the two people who had conspired to destroy my life completely tear each other to shreds in front of a federal judge. It was a tragicomedy of the highest order. They had built their alliance on a foundation of greed, and the moment the pressure was applied, they turned on each other like starving wolves. Evelyn stood quietly near the podium, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips, letting the enemy do all the heavy lifting. The destruction of my son was complete, but I knew the absolute worst was yet to come. I still had one final card to play. The violent cracking of Judge Mitchell slamming his wooden gavel echoed like gunshots through the federal courtroom. He demanded order, his voice laced with an unprecedented level of judicial fury. Two armed bailiffs rushed forward, positioning themselves directly behind the petitioner table. They forced Chloe to sit back down in her heavy wooden chair. She was panting heavily, her chest heaving, her perfectly styled hair now a tangled, frantic mess around her pale face. On the witness stand, my son Terrence was entirely broken. He had his face buried in his hands, weeping openly, the pathetic sound of his sobs vibrating through the courtroom microphone. He had just confessed to federal wire fraud. He had just admitted to forging my signature to steal my estate. He knew his life as a wealthy, arrogant technology executive was completely over. But Chloe was a different breed of monster. For someone like her, greed operates like a terminal disease. It completely overrides any basic human instinct for survival. Even as she sat there, surrounded by armed federal officers facing undeniable proof of her crimes, her mind was frantically searching for a way to salvage the money. She refused to accept that she was leaving this building empty-handed. She pushed herself up from the table, ignoring the bailiff who firmly placed a hand on her shoulder to keep her seated. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. "It does not matter," Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. Her eyes were completely wild, stripped of any remaining sanity. "You can arrest him for the signature. You can arrest the doctor. I do not care. He is still a useless, crazy old man. We are drowning in $1.5 million of debt. That historic house has to be sold to cover what we owe. It has to be liquidated right now. We are his only family. We are his only heirs. We are legally entitled to that property." The absolute audacity of her statement sent a fresh wave of horrified murmurs through the gallery. She was standing in a federal courtroom moments away from being indicted for conspiracy and elder abuse, and she was still aggressively demanding my money. She genuinely believed that because I was 72 years old, my life savings were simply a rainy day fund for her luxury lifestyle. Judge Mitchell was practically vibrating with anger. He picked up his gavel to hold her in contempt of court and have her removed in handcuffs right then and there. But I did not want her removed. Not yet. I had not delivered the killing blow. I placed my hand gently on Evelyn Vance's arm. My brilliant lawyer looked at me, saw the cold, absolute resolve in my eyes, and offered a slow, knowing nod. She stepped back from the podium, yielding the floor entirely to me. For the first time since I had walked into that courthouse, I stood up. I did not use a cane. I did not hunch my shoulders. I did not let my hands tremble. I stood up to my full height, drawing on the strength of a man who had carried steel beams and poured concrete foundations for 40 years. I smoothed the lapels of my dark charcoal suit. I looked at the judge, giving him a respectful nod, and then I turned my gaze directly onto the frantic, greedy woman who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating my intelligence. "If it pleases the court," I said, my voice rich, deep, and carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority, "I would like to address the petitioner's claim regarding my physical assets." Judge Mitchell slowly lowered his gavel. He looked at me clearly, recognizing that the fragile, confused old man portrayed in the court filings had never actually existed. "The floor is yours, Mr. Wright," the judge said quietly. I reached down into my leather briefcase resting on the defense table. I pulled out a thick, heavy legal binder bound in dark blue leather. I did not hand it to Evelyn. I held it myself, letting Chloe stare at it. "You have spent this entire morning and the last several months of your life obsessing over the value of my historic brownstone." I began, my voice cold and steady. "You hired a corrupt doctor. You forced your weak husband to commit federal wire fraud. You lied under oath. You risked spending the next 20 years of your life in a federal penitentiary, all because you wanted to seize control of a property you believe is worth $2.5 million. Chloe stared at the blue binder in my hands. Her frantic breathing hitched. She could feel the ground opening up beneath her, but she was entirely powerless to stop it. I opened the binder and pulled out a single, beautifully embossed legal document. "But here is the tragedy of your arrogance, Chloe." I continued, pacing slowly toward the center of the room. "You assumed that because I am an old black man who wears steel-toed boots and drives an old truck, I was financially illiterate. You assumed I was just sitting on a pile of equity waiting to die. But 5 years ago, when I first noticed Terrence hemorrhaging money to impress you, I took the necessary steps to protect my blood, sweat, and tears from predators exactly like you. I held the document up so the courtroom could see the official county seals stamped at the bottom. Even if you had successfully bribed the judge today, I said, my voice ringing out with brutal clarity. Even if your forged power of attorney had been accepted, even if you had successfully locked me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my natural life, you would have inherited absolutely nothing. Terrence lifted his head from his hands on the witness stand. His bloodshot eyes widened in pure horror as he finally recognized the blue leather binder. 5 years ago, I declared I legally transferred the deed to the historic brownstone along with every single liquid asset I possessed into an ironclad, irrevocable educational and living trust. I am no longer the legal owner of that house. The trust is. And the sole exclusive beneficiary of that multi-million-dollar trust is not my son. It is my granddaughter, Maya. The silence that fell over the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a massive explosion. You cannot touch a single dime of my money, Chloe. You cannot sell a single brick of my house. You committed federal crimes, you destroyed your marriage, and you ruined your entire life to steal a ghost. You went to war for an empty vault. Terrence let out a guttural, agonizing groan from the witness stand. He slumped forward, slamming his head against the wooden railing. He had forged documents. He had faced federal prison time. He had betrayed the father who loved him all to steal a house that had not belonged to me in half a decade. He had ruined his life for absolutely nothing. Chloe physically staggered backward. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The money was gone. It had always been gone. The massive debt hovering over her head was suddenly very real, and her only escape route had just been completely bricked up and sealed shut. But her arrogance refused to die quietly. She gripped the edge of her table, her face contorted in a mask of desperate, ugly pride. "Fine." Chloe spat, her voice trembling with barely contained hysteria. "Keep your rotting, disgusting house. We do not need your garbage charity. Terrence and I have our own assets. We have our own estate. We will sell the Buckhead mansion. We will liquidate our own properties. We do not need a single penny from a pathetic old man." I stopped pacing. I stood perfectly still in the center of the courtroom. I looked at this vicious, greedy woman who still believed she had a safety net to fall back on. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a master architect watching the final support beam of a condemned building snap in half. I looked her dead in the eyes, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the room was almost unbearable. "Did you really think," I asked, my voice dropping to a low, devastating whisper, "that you were living in that Buckhead mansion on Terrence's money?" My daughter-in-law dragged me into court, pointing her manicured finger at me and calling me a batshit crazy old man in front of a packed room. She claimed I had lost my mind. She told the judge I was a danger to myself and could not be trusted with my own estate. Her high-priced lawyer stood beside her, smiling with absolute confidence, certain they were about to strip away everything I had built over 40 years. That was until the judge banged his gavel, looked straight at her, and asked a single question. "Are you absolutely sure you want to continue with these accusations under oath?" The courtroom fell dead silent. Moments later, the judge ruled in my favor, and I watched the color completely drain from her pale face. But before I tell you how a 72-year-old retired contractor dismantled their entire lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respecting your elders is a rule, not an option. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Chloe stared at me, her chest heaving, her eyes darting back and forth as her brain struggled to process the question I had just asked her. Did she really think she was living in that Buckhead mansion on Terrence's money? She swallowed hard, looking down at her husband. Terrence was completely paralyzed on the witness stand. He was not looking at her. He was staring blankly at the polished wooden floor of the courtroom, his face entirely drained of blood. He knew exactly what I was about to say. He had known this day might come, but his arrogance had convinced him I would never pull the trigger. "What are you talking about?" Chloe demanded, her voice losing its hysterical edge and dropping into a shaky, uncertain whisper. "We bought that house 8 years ago. Terrence paid the down payment. We pay our mortgage every single month. You have absolutely nothing to do with our estate." I took a slow, measured step closer to the petitioner table. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth is always loudest when it is spoken quietly. 8 years ago, I began my words carrying perfectly across the silent gallery. Your husband wanted to play the part of the wildly successful technology executive. He wanted to give you the massive, sprawling estate in Buckhead because he knew a woman like you would never settle for a modest life. He wanted to impress your high society friends. He wanted to look like a self-made king. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the entire courtroom before locking back onto Chloe. But behind the expensive suits and the leased luxury cars, his financial foundation was already crumbling. His credit score was absolute garbage. His debt-to-income ratio was a massive, glaring red flag. Every single major banking institution in the city of Atlanta took one look at his financial portfolio and laughed him right out of their offices. No traditional bank was ever going to approve a multi-million-dollar mortgage for a man who was already drowning in hidden debts. Chloe physically recoiled. She looked at Terrence, her eyes wide with shock. "You told me we used a private wealth management firm," she whispered, her voice trembling with the sudden, terrifying realization that her entire marriage was built on a mountain of lies. "You told me the banks were just too slow." Terrence squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear rolled down his cheek, dropping onto his inexpensive navy suit. He could not even look his wife in the eye. "He lied to you, Chloe," I said smoothly. "Because he was desperate, and in his desperation he came crawling to the one man he knew had the capital to bail him out. He came crying to the batshit crazy old man he just tried to lock in a psychiatric ward." I reached into the blue leather binder resting on my table. I pulled out a crisp, heavy stack of financial documents. I did not just hand him the cash, I explained, walking the documents over to the court clerk to be entered into the official record. "I am a builder. I know that if you hand a foolish man a pile of bricks, he will just drop them on his own feet. I wanted to teach him responsibility. So I established an anonymous private limited liability company, Iron Foundation Holdings." Chloe stopped breathing. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. She recognized the name immediately. "That is right," I said, watching the devastating realization wash over her pale face. "Iron Foundation Holdings, the anonymous private lending company that holds the deed to your beautiful Buckhead mansion. The company you have been writing your monthly mortgage checks to for the last 8 years. You thought you were paying a faceless corporate entity. You had absolutely no idea that you were sending your money directly into my private accounts. I am the sole proprietor of that company, Chloe. I am your bank. I am your landlord. I am the man who actually owns the roof over your head." The gallery behind me erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers. Even Judge Mitchell leaned back in his heavy leather chair, his eyebrows raised in profound astonishment. He had seen decades of brutal legal battles, but he had never seen a trap sprung with such devastating architectural precision. Chloe grabbed the edge of her table to keep from collapsing. Her legs were visibly shaking. "No," she gasped, shaking her head in frantic denial. "No, that is illegal. You cannot do that. We pay our mortgage. We own that house." Evelyn Vance stepped forward, joining me in the center of the courtroom. Her crimson blazer seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Actually, Mrs. Wright," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with lethal professional courtesy, "that is the most interesting part of this entire situation. You see, when my client audited the financial records of Iron Foundation Holdings last week, he discovered a rather severe breach of contract." Evelyn pulled a single sheet of paper from her own file and handed it directly to Judge Mitchell. "Your Honor," Evelyn stated clearly, "according to the certified financial ledgers, the petitioners have completely failed to make a single mortgage payment for the last 6 consecutive months. They are in massive, undeniable default." I turned back to Chloe. She was completely paralyzed, staring at me like a cornered animal, realizing the trap was fully closed. "You stopped paying your mortgage the exact same month Terrence's startup began to collapse," I told her, my voice turning to cold steel. "But you did not stop spending money, did you, Chloe? You just redirected the funds. You stopped paying the man who put a roof over your head so you could keep buying designer clothes. You skipped your mortgage payments so you could finance luxury vacations to the Florida Keys. You took the money you owed me and you used it to stuff a thick white envelope full of $100 bills to bribe a corrupt doctor to destroy my life." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless sob came out. She looked around the courtroom, desperately searching for a way out, but there were no exits left. Her high-priced lawyer had completely abandoned her. Her husband was a weeping, broken mess on the witness stand. The judge was glaring at her with absolute disgust. "You brought me into this federal courtroom today to strip me of my home," I said, my voice rising just enough to command every corner of the vast room. "You stood under oath and tried to throw me out onto the street. You thought you were the predator, Chloe. You thought I was just an easy, fragile target." I reached into my briefcase one final time. I pulled out a bright yellow legal folder. It was the color of a demolition warning sign. I walked directly over to the petitioner table. I did not hand the folder to her lawyer. I slapped it down directly on the polished wood right in front of Chloe's trembling hands. "These are official court-certified foreclosure and emergency eviction documents," I announced, every word striking her like a physical blow. "The grace period for your missed payments expired yesterday at midnight. I have legally triggered the default clause on your mortgage." Chloe stared down at the yellow folder as if it were a loaded bomb. She was shaking so violently her chair rattled against the floor. "You have exactly 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from my property," I told her, leaning down so she could hear the absolute unforgiving finality in my voice. "After that, the county sheriff will arrive to physically remove you from the premises, change the locks, and seize any remaining assets to cover your outstanding debts." Chloe turned completely to stone. The arrogant, wealthy woman who had called me a crazy old man was entirely dead and gone. In her place sat a terrified, completely bankrupt criminal who had just realized she was about to be homeless. She had tried to steal my historic home to save her luxury lifestyle, and instead I was the one throwing her out onto the street. She looked up at me, her eyes completely hollowed out by the crushing weight of her own greed. She finally understood that she had not just lost a legal battle, she had lost everything, and the man she had underestimated had personally engineered her absolute destruction. Judge Mitchell did not bang his gavel this time. He did not need to. The heavy, suffocating silence in the courtroom was absolute. The judge looked down at the bright yellow foreclosure folder resting on the petitioner table. He looked at the forged power of attorney document. He looked at the video stills of the cash bribe. And finally, he looked at Chloe and Terrence. When Judge Mitchell finally spoke, his voice was not a roar. It was a low, dangerous rumble, the sound of a judicial earthquake about to tear the ground wide open. "This court has witnessed many terrible things." Judge Mitchell began, his eyes locked onto my daughter-in-law. "I have presided over this bench for 22 years. I have seen greed. I have seen malice. But I have never in my entire career witnessed such a calculated, despicable, and thoroughly evil manipulation of the justice system. You came into my courtroom, stood under oath, and attempted to legally assassinate a perfectly healthy, honorable man simply because you wanted to liquidate his life to fund your own pathetic arrogance." Chloe was completely frozen. Her mouth was open, but no air seemed to be entering her lungs. Terrence was still weeping into his hands, unable to even look up at the bench. "The petition for emergency conservatorship is hereby dismissed with extreme prejudice," Judge Mitchell announced, his words striking like physical blows. "But we are far from finished here today. This was not a simple domestic dispute. What you two have done constitutes a highly coordinated criminal conspiracy." The judge turned to his court clerk. "Seal every single exhibit presented by the defense today. Impound the forged documents, the audio recordings, and the bank transaction logs. Contact the United States Attorney Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately." Chloe suddenly gasped, her hands flying to her throat. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words seemed to finally break through her wall of shock. She looked around frantically as if expecting to find a secret exit. "That is right, Mrs. Wright," the judge said coldly. "You and your husband have committed severe federal offenses. Wire fraud across state lines, conspiracy to commit medical fraud, bribery of a licensed medical professional, felony perjury, and the most aggressive case of elder abuse I have ever seen. You will not be walking out of the front doors of this courthouse today." Judge Mitchell looked to the back of the room and gave a sharp, definitive nod. "Bailiffs, take the petitioners into immediate custody." 4 large armed court officers stepped forward from the shadows of the gallery. They moved with swift, tactical precision. 2 of them approached Terrence, who simply held his hands out, surrendering completely to the weight of his own failures. He wept as the cold metal cuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. But Chloe did not surrender. When the officer reached for her arm, the reality of her total destruction finally snapped her mind in half. She jerked her body away violently, knocking her heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor with a loud crash. "Do not touch me!" Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing through the courtroom like a dying animal. "You cannot do this to me. I am not going to jail. I have a life. I have a social standing. You cannot lock me up." The officers did not hesitate. They moved in seamlessly, grabbing her arms and forcing them firmly behind her back. Chloe fought them like a wildcat. She kicked her ruined white Gucci loafers against the polished floor. She twisted her body, screaming absolute nonsense, her perfectly styled hair completely destroyed, hanging over her face in a sweaty, tangled mess. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed perfectly through the room. The sound was beautiful. It was the sound of absolute justice. As the officers dragged her away from the table, Chloe locked her wild, furious eyes on me. The mask was completely gone. There was no fragile victim left. There was only a vicious, greedy predator who had been caught in her own trap. "You did this to me," Chloe screamed, her face red and distorted with pure hatred. "You ruined my life, you disgusting old man. I hate you. I will always hate you. You should have just died. You should have just died and left us the money." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I stood perfectly still, looking at her with absolute, unwavering calm. "I built my house with brick and mortar, Chloe," I replied softly, though my voice carried across the silent room. "You built yours on lies and stolen money. Do not blame me, because your roof caved in." The officers pulled her forcefully toward the side, holding doors. She continued to scream, kicking and fighting, cursing my name until the heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her hysterical cries completely. I turned my attention back to the center of the room. Terrence was still standing there, flanked by two officers. His hands were cuffed behind his back. The expensive suit he wore looked like a cheap costume on a broken man. He looked at me, his eyes swollen and red, filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading. He fell to his knees right there in the middle of the federal courtroom. The loud thud of his kneecaps hitting the hardwood floor echoed loudly. "Dad, please." Terrence sobbed, his voice breaking into a miserable whine. "Please do not do this to me. I was desperate. I was scared. She manipulated me, Dad. You know she did. I am your son. I am your only boy. Please, Dad, forgive me. Help me." I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of paternal warmth. I searched for the love I used to feel when I taught him how to throw a baseball or when I paid for his college tuition. But the vault was completely empty. He had burned it all to the ground the moment he forged my signature to steal my life. A man takes responsibility for his own actions, Terrence. I said, my voice empty of any emotion. You made your choice when you decided I was worth more to you dead or locked in a cage than I was alive. You are not a victim. You are a thief. Dad, I am sorry, he wailed, bowing his head toward the floor. I love you. I tightened my grip on my leather briefcase. My son died the day he signed my name to steal my life, I told him coldly. I do not know the criminal kneeling in front of me. I turned my back on him completely. I did not watch as the officers hauled him to his feet. I did not watch as they dragged my weeping, ruined son through the same heavy wooden doors his wife had just disappeared behind. I faced the front of the courtroom, my posture straight, my dignity entirely intact. Judge Mitchell looked at me. There was a profound, unspoken respect in his eyes. The judge offered me a slow, solemn nod, acknowledging the brutal, necessary strength it took to clean up my own bloodline. We are adjourned, Judge Mitchell announced quietly, stepping down from his bench. Evelyn Vance gathered her files, placing a gentle, respectful hand on my shoulder. We did it, Desmond, she whispered. I nodded slowly. We turned around to walk down the center aisle, heading toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. And then something extraordinary happened. It started slowly. A single person in the second row of the gallery stood up and began to clap. Then an older woman next to them stood up, joining in. Within seconds, the entire courtroom gallery was on their feet. The sound of applause filled the massive vaulted room. It was not a polite golf clap. It was a loud, resonant, deeply emotional ovation. People who had never met me, people who had come to the courthouse for their own mundane legal troubles, were standing and clapping. They had watched an elderly black man walk into a trap designed to destroy him, and they had watched him dismantle his abusers with absolute terrifying precision. They were applauding the victory of truth over greed. They were celebrating the triumph of a man who refused to become a victim. I walked down the aisle, feeling the vibration of their applause in my chest. Maya was waiting for me near the exit, tears of absolute joy and relief streaming down her beautiful face. I wrapped my large arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors and walked out into the bright, clear Atlanta sunlight, leaving the wreckage of Terrence and Chloe far behind us in the dark. 2 months passed since the heavy wooden gavel fell in that federal courtroom, bringing an absolute and devastating end to the illusion of my family. The changing of the seasons brought a crisp, bitter autumn breeze to the streets of Washington, D.C., blowing away the lingering stench of betrayal that had infected my life for so long. The legal system moves incredibly slowly in most cases, but when it is fueled by a mountain of undeniable hard evidence, it crushes everything in its path like a slow-moving freight train. Chloe was the very first to feel the crushing, suffocating weight of her new reality. She did not return to her high society brunches, her luxury shopping sprees, or her expensive weekend spas. Instead, she was currently sitting in a highly secured county holding facility, stripped of her designer dresses and forced to wear a standard-issue bright orange jumpsuit. The federal prosecutors were absolutely merciless with her. They hit her with a relentless barrage of felony charges, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bribery of a medical professional, and severe elder abuse. Her own high-priced lawyer had completely abandoned her the moment he realized she had no money left to pay his exorbitant retainers. She was left entirely in the hands of a severely overworked public defender who bluntly informed her that she was facing a mandatory minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no chance of early parole. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to save her own skin, Chloe filed for a hasty divorce from inside her jail cell. She tried to flip the entire narrative, claiming that Terrence was the sole abusive mastermind behind the entire operation. She told the federal investigators that she was just a terrified, obedient wife who was forced into participating in the fraud against her will. But nobody believed a single word she said. The crystal-clear audio recordings of her screaming at the corrupt doctor, aggressively demanding he forge the medical documents and lock me away, played on a continuous loop in the prosecutor office. Her divorce filing was nothing more than a useless piece of paper. She had traded her freedom and her soul for sheer greed, and now she was paying the ultimate unforgiving price. Terrence did not fare any better on the outside. The very moment the federal fraud investigation became public knowledge, his highly praised technology startup completely imploded. The venture capital investors swooped in like starving vultures, seizing every single corporate asset, freezing his business bank accounts, and officially forcing the company into a brutal, highly publicized bankruptcy. He went from being a self-proclaimed arrogant tech visionary to a disgraced bankrupt criminal in a matter of 72 hours. I kept my solemn word regarding the Buckhead mansion. I did not give them a single inch of grace or a fraction of sympathy. My holding company executed the foreclosure paperwork with ruthless mechanical efficiency. The massive, sprawling estate with its imported marble floors and heated swimming pools was seized, boarded up, and auctioned off to the highest bidder to recover the unpaid mortgage debts. Terrence was thrown out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on his back and a single scuffed suitcase. The man who used to mock my steel-toed boots and my modest lifestyle was now living in a cheap, rundown motel on the far industrial outskirts of Atlanta. I heard from Evelyn Vance and her legal team that he was struggling to even scrape together the weekly rate of $40 a night. His wealthy elite friends completely stopped answering his phone calls. His professional network treated him like a highly contagious disease. He was completely isolated, trapped in a tiny, moldy room with the crushing, inescapable realization of what he had so carelessly thrown away. I knew he would eventually come looking for me. A parasite always tries to return to its original host when it begins to starve. It happened on a cold, dark Tuesday afternoon. A heavy, relentless rainstorm was washing over the city, turning the streets into slick, gray rivers and drowning out the noise of the surrounding neighborhood. I was sitting quietly on my covered front porch, drinking a hot cup of black coffee and watching the heavy rain bounce off the pavement. A solitary figure appeared at the very end of my long driveway. He was walking slowly, his head bowed deeply against the driving rain. He had no umbrella to shield himself from the storm. He was not wearing an expensive, custom-tailored Italian suit. He wore a faded, oversized, gray hooded sweatshirt and worn-out, muddy sneakers. It took me a long moment to even recognize my own son. Terrence stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs. He was completely soaked to the bone, shivering violently in the freezing wind. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow, dark, and utterly defeated. The arrogant spark that used to define him was completely extinguished. He looked 10 years older than the man who had stood confidently in the courtroom just 2 months prior. "Dad," Terrence whispered. His voice was so fragile, so broken, it barely carried over the steady sound of the falling rain. I did not invite him up onto the dry porch. I did not offer him a warm towel or a fresh cup of coffee to fight off the bitter cold. I simply sat perfectly still in my chair, and looked down at him with the calm, impassive, calculating gaze of a complete stranger. Terrence took a hesitant step forward, gripping the wet wooden railing of the stairs with shaking hands. "Please, Dad," he sobbed, his voice cracking with sheer pathetic desperation. "I have absolutely nothing left in this world." Chloe filed for divorce to save herself. The federal prosecutors are officially preparing my criminal indictment. I am sleeping on a stained, lumpy mattress in a motel room that smells like bleach and desperation. I have not eaten a real warm meal in 2 entire days. I am begging you. I know I was completely wrong. I know I lost my way. But I am your son. Please just give me a second chance. Just a small cash loan to get me on my feet and hire a decent lawyer. I will pay you back every single cent. I swear it on my life. I listened to his pathetic whining pleas. I watched him cry in the freezing rain, desperately hoping to manipulate the deep paternal instincts I had utilized to raise him from a boy into a man. But those specific instincts had been permanently surgically removed from my heart the exact day I saw him forge my signature to steal my life. I set my ceramic coffee mug down on the small table next to my chair. I stood up slowly, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked down at the miserable, shivering creature standing on my walkway. "You are not my son, Terrence," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy rain and the howling wind like a sharpened steel blade. My son would have known the absolute value of hard work. My son would have known that respect and legacy are earned through blood and sweat, not stolen through deceit. "You are just a broken man who happens to share my last name. Dad, please do not say that to me," Terrence wailed, falling hard to his knees right there on the wet, unforgiving concrete. "I was poisoned by her. Chloe poisoned my mind from the start. She made me care about the status and the money. She made me think we desperately needed the house to survive. I was just trying to keep my marriage together. I was just trying to be enough for her. Stop blaming the woman you consciously chose to marry." I commanded, my voice booming with absolute terrifying authority. "You are a grown man. You made your own deliberate choices. You looked at the father who fed you, who educated you, who built a life from the dirt so you would never have to struggle for a single meal, and you decided I was nothing more than a disposable obstacle to your blinding greed." Terrence looked down at his wet, empty hands, sobbing uncontrollably into the storm. "A black man never sells his soul and his family to falsehoods." "Terrence," I told him, delivering the final absolute truth he desperately needed to hear. "We survive in this harsh world through unwavering loyalty, through deep integrity, and through the unbreakable strength of our foundation. You took a heavy sledgehammer to your own foundation because you were far too weak to face your own financial failures. You tried to bury me alive simply to cover your own tracks." I paused for a long moment, letting the cold rain physically wash over the heavy silence between us. "You dug your own grave, Terrence," I said softly, but with absolute crushing finality. "Now you must lie in it alone." Terrence stayed on his knees in the puddles for a very long time. He looked up at me one last time, his tear-streaked face searching frantically for a microscopic crack in my armor, a tiny lingering glimmer of the forgiving father he used to easily manipulate. But he found absolutely nothing. He saw only a towering fortress made of solid stone. He finally understood that there was no returning from the bridge he had so willingly burned to ashes. He slowly pushed himself up from the wet concrete. He did not say another word. He turned his back to me, wrapped his thin, soaked sweatshirt tighter around his shaking, miserable body, and began to walk away. I stood on the porch and watched him walk back down the long, winding driveway. I watched him step out into the flooded, empty street, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in total, irreversible defeat. He walked until his pathetic figure blurred and completely disappeared into the heavy gray rain. He was gone. He had walked into my life with absolutely nothing, and because of his own blinding, toxic arrogance, he was walking out of it with exactly the same. I turned around, picked up my warm cup of coffee, and walked back inside my beautiful, quiet home. I locked the heavy oak door behind me, feeling a profound, absolute peace settle deep into my bones. The storm was raging wildly outside, but inside my walls, my legacy was perfectly secure. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow across the front porch of my historic brownstone. The violent storms of the past few months had finally completely blown over, leaving behind a profound, unshakable peace. I sat in my favorite wooden rocking chair, the one I had carved by hand 30 years ago. Beside me sat my granddaughter Maya, holding a steaming mug of sweet tea. The neighborhood was quiet, filled only with the gentle rustling of the autumn leaves, and the distant, innocent laughter of children playing down the street. It was the exact kind of peace that you cannot buy. It is the kind of peace you have to fight for, the kind you have to defend with everything you have. Maya took a slow sip of her tea and looked out at the street. She looked older now, more mature. The terrified 18-year-old girl who had stood soaking wet in my kitchen was gone. In her place sat a brilliant, confident young woman who was ready to take on the world. In just 2 short weeks, she would be packing her bags to begin her first semester at one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. She was not taking out predatory student loans. She was not begging for favors. Her entire tuition, her housing, and her living expenses were fully covered by the irrevocable educational trust I had built for her. She was the true legacy of my 40 years of hard labor. "I am going to miss this porch," Maya said softly, a warm smile spreading across her face. "But I think I am ready. I have been reading through the preliminary syllabus they sent over. It is a lot of work, but I know I can handle it." I looked at her with an overwhelming sense of pride. "You are going to do more than just handle it." "Maya," I told her, my voice thick with emotion, "you are going to master it. You have a builder's mind. You know how to look at the foundation of a problem and figure out exactly how to solve it. You proved that to me the night you brought me that stolen flash drive. You proved that you have the courage to stand up for what is right even when it is terrifying." Maya looked down at her hands, the memory of that dark, rainy night clearly flashing through her mind. She remained quiet for a long moment, listening to the gentle creaking of my rocking chair against the wooden floorboards. "Grandpa," she finally asked, her voice dropping into a soft, serious tone. "There is something I have been wanting to ask you for months, something I just do not understand." I nodded slowly, gesturing for her to continue. "Ask whatever you need to ask, little one. There are no secrets left in this house." "How did you do it?" she asked, turning to look me directly in the eyes. "How did you stay so incredibly calm? When Chloe was screaming in your face, when she slapped you, when my father forged your signature and tried to lock you away in a psychiatric ward. You never yelled, you never lost your temper, you never showed them how much it must have hurt. How did you face that level of absolute betrayal without completely losing your mind?" I took a long, slow breath, letting the cool autumn air fill my lungs. It was a profound question, the kind of question that requires a lifetime of hard lessons to properly answer. I looked out at the tall, sturdy oak tree standing in my front yard. I planted that tree the very first week I bought this property. I had watched it weather countless hurricanes, blizzards, and droughts. When you spend your entire life building skyscrapers and commercial foundations from the dirt up, I began, my voice steady and resonant. You learn a very important lesson about structural integrity. When you see a building that is poorly constructed, a building that is rotting from the inside out, you do not stand underneath it and scream at the cracking walls. You do not get angry at the concrete for failing. You simply step back. You secure your own perimeter and you let gravity do the heavy lifting. You let the corrupt structure collapse entirely under the weight of its own arrogance. I looked back at Maya, making sure she understood the gravity of my words. Your father and his wife built their entire lives on a rotten foundation of greed, deceit, and vanity. They thought their expensive clothes and their luxury cars made them untouchable. But I knew the truth. I knew they were hollow. If I had yelled, if I had thrown a tantrum, if I had reacted to their insults, I would have been stepping into their collapsing building. I would have given them exactly what they wanted. I would have given them the angry, erratic old man they needed to prove their fabricated narrative. Maya listened intently, absorbing every single word like a sponge. There is a massive, undeniable power in silence, Maya. I continued, leaning forward in my rocking chair. People, especially arrogant people, are absolutely terrified of silence. When you do not react to their provocations, they panic. They start filling the empty space with their own mistakes. They get sloppy, they talk too much, they reveal their true intentions. My silence was not weakness, it was not submission. My silence was a highly calculated weapon. I let them underestimate me because an underestimated man is the most dangerous person in any room. But it was your own son, she whispered, a hint of sadness returning to her eyes. It must have broken your heart. I nodded slowly, not denying the painful truth. It did break my heart, Maya. It broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. But a black man who grew up in the era that I did learns very early on that you cannot afford to let a broken heart blind your judgment. Society already expects us to be angry. Society already expects us to be loud or fragile or easily discarded when we get old. I refused to play the role they assigned to me. I reached out and placed my rough, calloused hand over hers. Never let anyone else appraise your value. Maya, I told her, delivering the most important lesson I could ever pass down. Do not ever let a person, a job, or a society tell you what you are worth. Chloe looked at me and saw a batshit crazy old man who was taking up valuable real estate. Terrence looked at me and saw a walking ATM machine that he could violently crack open to pay for his failures. They put a cheap price tag on my life because they had absolutely no personal integrity of their own. But their appraisal did not change my actual value. I knew exactly who I was. I knew the blood and sweat it took to build this empire, and I refused to let thieves dictate my worth. Maya squeezed my hand tightly. Tears welled up in her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of deep, profound understanding. She nodded, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. I am going to make you proud, Grandpa. I am going to go to law school, and I am going to become the kind of lawyer who protects people like you. I'm going to tear down the bullies just like you did. I smiled, feeling a deep, radiating warmth in my chest. You already make me proud, Maya. You are the foundation of this family now. You are the steel beams that will keep this legacy standing tall long after I am gone. We sat together in comfortable, healing silence as the sun began to slowly dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The streetlights flickered on, casting a warm, familiar glow across the neighborhood I had loved for 4 decades. I took a final sip of my tea and leaned back in my chair. I thought about the long, brutal journey that had brought me to this exact moment. The betrayal, the secret recordings, the courtroom battle, and the ultimate satisfying destruction of the people who tried to bury me. It was a heavy burden for a 72-year-old man to carry, but my shoulders were broad, and my spirit was completely unbreakable. I looked out at the peaceful street, breathing in the cool, clean air of absolute freedom. My house was safe. My wealth was secure. My granddaughter was embarking on a brilliant future. I had walked through the absolute darkest storm of betrayal, navigating the treacherous waters of human greed, and I had emerged on the other side completely victorious. I was a man who possessed a dignity that could never be stolen, a peace that could never be bought, and a legacy that would stand strong for generations to come. The months rolled by, turning the bitter cold of winter into the bright, promising warmth of a new spring. My historic brownstone in Washington, D.C., had finally returned to what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary. I woke up every morning at 6 o'clock, not because I had to rush to a construction site, but because I wanted to watch the sunrise paint the city skyline. I would walk down to my kitchen, brew a strong pot of dark roast coffee, and sit at the solid oak dining table, the very same table where Chloe had once slapped down that assisted living brochure, the table where they had plotted to erase my existence. Now the only thing resting on that mahogany wood was my morning newspaper and a profound, absolute silence. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of secrets and betrayal. It was a clean, breathing silence, the kind of peace you only feel after you have successfully defended your life against a massive storm. People often ask me how a father can simply walk away from his own flesh and blood. They wonder how I sleep at night knowing my only son is living in a rundown motel stripped of his wealth and his dignity. But when you spend 40 years as a structural engineer, you learn a hard, unforgiving truth about the nature of decay. When you are inspecting a house and you find dry rot eating away at a crucial wooden support beam, you cannot negotiate with it. You cannot paint over the rot to make it look pretty. You cannot ignore it and hope it magically heals itself. If you do not take a saw and violently cut out every single inch of that infected wood, the rot will inevitably spread. It will climb up the walls, infect the ceiling, and eventually bring the entire massive structure crashing down on your head. Terrence and Chloe were the rot in my foundation. They were an infection born of pure greed and blind arrogance, slowly eating away at the legacy I had sacrificed my entire life to build. Cutting my own son out of my life was the most painful, agonizing amputation I have ever had to perform. It hurt more than carrying steel beams up 3 flights of stairs with a bad back. But it was absolutely necessary. If I had let them stay, if I had forgiven them or handed over my hard-earned money to save them from their own failures, the infection would have destroyed us all. I had to sever the dead necrotic tissue to protect the parts of my family that were still healthy and full of life. And that healthy part was my granddaughter Maya. She calls me every Sunday evening from her law school dormitory. Her voice is always bright, filled with the excitement of a young woman who knows her future is entirely secure. She tells me about her grueling classes, her mock trials, and her ambition to become a fierce advocate for the vulnerable. I listen to her speak, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that I made the right choice. My wealth did not go toward funding Chloe's designer shoe collection or bailing out Terrence's fraudulent business ventures. It went toward building a brilliant, unstoppable legal mind. Maya is the sturdy, unyielding steel beam that will carry the Wright family name forward with actual honor. As for me, I am 72 years old, but my heart feels lighter than it did when I was 30. I spend my afternoons reading on my front porch, waving to Mrs. Jenkins as she waters her hydrangeas across the street. The neighbors look at me with a renewed sense of deep respect. They know the quiet, unassuming black man on the corner does not tolerate disrespect, and he protects his territory with absolute precision. I do not harbor any lingering hatred for the people who tried to destroy me. Hatred is a heavy burden, and I refuse to carry their baggage anymore. I simply let them dig their own graves, and I stepped out of the way when the dirt caved in. Blood makes you related, but loyalty, respect, and integrity make you family. When greed replaces love, the ties that bind us become the chains that suffocate us. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, mistake your kindness for weakness or your silence for ignorance. A predator will always underestimate the quiet strength of someone who has spent a lifetime building their foundation. In the end, the most powerful revenge is not destruction. It is standing tall in your truth, protecting your legacy, and letting their own arrogance dig their grave. If this story resonated with you, please let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace? Share your experiences, and do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of truth and absolute justice. Thank you for listening, and remember to always protect your foundation.